Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere humid, loud and unsettling. A place filled with mosquitoes, mud, fear, and the kind of boredom that eats at you until you'll take almost anything to make it stop. We're diving into what life was really like for American soldiers in Vietnam. Not the heroic Hollywood montages, not the clean uniforms and noble speeches, but the daily grind of exhaustion, confusion, and the chemical shortcuts that many young men leaned on just to keep going. Before we get into it, take a second to like and subscribe if you actually enjoy these kinds of deep dives, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I always find it fascinating to see the different time zones and corners of the world tuning in. So, settle in. Dim the lights, maybe pull a blanket over yourself, and let a fan hum in the background. Imagine it's the helicopter blades in the distance, or the restless jungle air that never stops buzzing. Tonight, we're going to explore the war through a lens people don't usually talk about. Not medals or strategy, but the drugs in pockets, in veins, and in minds. The small pills and roll joints that blurred reality, dulled pain, and sometimes made things a whole lot worse. Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1968. You're 19 years old, drafted straight from high school, and now you're sweating on the floor of a tent in South Vietnam. You're alive. But you're also in a place where survival doesn't just mean dodging bullets. It means surviving your own thoughts, your own nerves, and sometimes the things you put in your own bloodstream. You blink awake, not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the damp heaviness of a jungle morning pressing down on your lungs. The air feels thick, like breathing through a wet towel. Every inhale carries a mix of mould, gasoline, sweat, and something rotting you can't quite identify. Welcome to Vietnam. Your bed isn't really a bed at all. It's a cot if you're lucky, a patch of ground if you're not, and either way the ground beneath you is soaked through with last night's rain. The canvas tent above your head is sagging under the weight of water that dripped all night, finding every gap in the stitching to land on your face with clockwork precision. Sleep doesn't come easy out here. It's shallow, broken, and never enough. When you do manage to drift off, it's not quiet dreams that greet you. It's the churning of helicopters overhead, or the snap of branches that might just be the wind, or might be something much worse. You pull yourself up and instantly feel the ache in your back, the stiffness in your legs. You're 19, maybe 20, but your body feels decades older. The damp never leaves your bones. Your clothes, the same uniform you wore yesterday and the day before, are stuck to your skin. The smell rising from the fabric is part mildew, part human, part smoke from a dozen campfires, and it never really washes out. You peel it off only when absolutely necessary, because stripping down means mosquitoes, and mosquitoes mean misery. Around you, the others are stirring. Some curse quietly under their breath, rubbing sleep out of their eyes with hands that are already calloused and dirt-streaked. A few light cigarettes before they're even fully awake. The thin lines of smoke curling up and mixing with the heavy, wet air. Tobacco here isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. The small ritual of lighting up helps convince you that morning is manageable, that another day of patrols, ambushes, and endless waiting isn't about to crush you. Your boots, caked in dried mud from yesterday's march, sit by your cot. Putting them on is its own battle. The leather is stiff, your socks are damp no matter how many pairs you try to rotate, and trench foot isn't some distant horror story. It's a real possibility gnawing at the edge of your thoughts. The jungle has a way of breaking down everything. Metal rusts, fabric rots, skin softens and splits. You could already feel the blisters forming again as you lace them up. Every soldier here knows the first thing that gives out isn't courage, it's your feet. Then there are the sounds. Morning in Vietnam isn't birdsong and peaceful breezes. It's cicadas screaming like an electrical current that never switches off. The constant buzzing of flies that seem drawn to every open can, every unwashed plate, every drop of sweat. Somewhere not far off, artillery thumps a low, dull echo that blends into the background until you almost forget it's there. Helicopter blades chop the air in the distance, and every time you hear them, you wonder if they're bringing supplies or body bags. The routine of waking up here isn't about comfort. It's about bracing yourself. You check your gear with hands that shake just slightly, whether from nerves or the malaria pills you're forced to swallow every morning. The little white tablets taste like chalk and sit heavy in your stomach, but you take them anyway, because the only thing worse than patrolling this jungle is doing it while shivering under a fever that could kill you quicker than a bullet. Breakfast isn't much. A can of sea rations if you're lucky. Something greyish with a label that promises beef but tastes like rubbery salt. You open it with the clumsy metal tool every soldier carries, the P-38, and wonder how many more mornings will begin like this. Some guys trade their rations, trying to swap the worst cans for anything resembling chocolate or crackers. Others don't bother eating at all, just wash the bitterness down with instant coffee strong enough to make your eyelids twitch. The coffee doesn't wake you up so much as shove you forward into the day, whether you're ready or not. There's no such thing as privacy. Every movement you make, every groan, every muttered complaint is heard by the men lying inches from you. You live shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same air, stepping over each other's gear, seeing each other at your best and your worst. You know who snores, who grinds their teeth, who cries quietly when they think no one notices. Out here, you don't get to hide who you are. The jungle and the war strip you down until all that's left is raw survival. Sometimes, the morning begins with orders to move out immediately. Other times, it's endless waiting. Hours sitting in the damp, swatting flies, shifting from one sore spot to another. Your nerves stretch tight, because at any second, everything could explode into chaos. Waiting might sound easy, but waiting is its own kind of torture. It's in the still moments that your mind drifts, that you start thinking about home, about friends who didn't make it, about the faces of people you can't call or write to anymore. And that's when the real weight presses down. Some guys deal with it by cracking jokes, laughing too loudly at things that aren't funny. Others go quiet, staring into the distance like they're trying to will themselves somewhere else. And some already have something in their pocket, rolled up or wrapped tight in little baggies, to make the morning softer, to blur the edges just enough to get by. You see it everywhere, even before the day really starts. The jungle doesn't care if you're sober or high, but the man next to you might care a lot about finding a way to keep his head from splitting in two. The jungle doesn't let you wake up slowly. It's relentless. The heat climbs with the sun until the air feels like it's pressing you into the dirt. Sweat soaks through your shirt before you even finish lacing your boots. Mosquitoes swarm your neck, your wrists, the bare skin where your sleeves don't reach, leaving angry welts that itch until you scratch them raw. You slap at them half-heartedly, knowing there are too many to kill, that you're basically just part of the food chain out here. Even when you douse yourself in repellent, they come back, always. You hear movement outside the tent, men shifting their rifles, coughing into their hands, adjusting packs that never seem to get lighter. The jungle is waiting, always waiting, and you're about to step back into it, whether you want to or not. You stand, stretch the stiffness out of your back, and glance at the others. Some are already moving with mechanical precision, strapping on helmets, slinging rifles, faces blank as if expression itself takes too much energy. Others drag their feet, moving slowly like every motion is weighed down with invisible chains. You see it in their eyes. Some are clear, sharp, locked in. Others are glassy, unfocused, pupils too wide or too small. Everyone's here, but not everyone is entirely here. The sun is climbing higher now, the light filtering through thick layers of leaves, casting everything in a strange green glow. The shadows shift constantly, and every shadow looks like it could be hiding something. You know that feeling won't leave you today. It never does. Out here, even waking up isn't safe. You start the day already tired, already wired, already reaching for something to make it bearable. And with that, the day begins. The first thing that really hits you once you're upright isn't the sight of the jungle or the sound of gunfire in the distance. It's the smell. Out here, nothing ever smells clean. Everything carries a stench that clings to your skin, seeps into your clothes, and refuses to leave. Vietnam doesn't just smell like one thing. It smells like a dozen things layered on top of each other, none of them good. There's the dampness, the heavy, sour odour of wet earth that never dries. The jungle floor is a swamp half the time, a breeding ground for rot and mould. Every step stirs it up, the mud carrying a pungent mix of decomposing leaves, stagnant water, and the faint sweetness of something dead nearby. Animals die out here and melt back into the soil quickly, but not before leaving behind that sharp, unforgettable tang of decay. You learn to recognise it. It becomes background noise for your nose, but it's never pleasant. Then there's the constant presence of smoke. The military runs on smoke, whether it's from campfires, cigarette after cigarette, or the choking haze of burning brush. The air smells like ash so often that it becomes part of the fabric of life. Soldiers chain smoke because there isn't much else to do, and the smoke sits in the tents, saturates your uniforms, makes your fingers yellow and sticky. It's in your hair, your breath, the pores of your skin. Even when you're not smoking, you smell like you are you. Cigarettes are a coping mechanism, a social glue, and a way to keep mosquitoes at bay. But they leave you with a permanent haze of burnt paper and tar hanging around your body. Add to that the fuel. Everything runs on gasoline, and gasoline leaks. From helicopters, from trucks, from generators. That sharp chemical scent cuts through everything else, mixing with the sweat pouring off your body. It hangs heavy in the air whenever supply convoys roll through your aircraft lift off. Even when you're deep in the bush, away from the base, it lingers on your clothes, on your gear, in your nostrils. You can't escape it. And sweat. God, the sweat. Human bodies in this climate produce it by the gallon. Shirts are soaked through by morning, boots fill with it by noon, and every soldier reeks of salt and heat. It's not the clean smell of exertion you might get after a workout back home. It's stale, sour, thick, layered with mildew from damp uniforms that never truly dry. Showers are rare, soap even rarer, so the sweat just builds on itself day after day until everyone carries their own personal cloud. 100 men crammed together smell like 100 walking salt mines, and nobody can do anything about it. Food adds another layer to the mix. Sea rations have their own special brand of stench. Open a can and you're greeted with the metallic tang of tinned meat, the greasy film of congealed fat, or the chalky dust of instant coffee. The mess tents, when they exist, don't smell like comfort. They smell like boiled starch, burned grease, and canned fruit that's just about to go off. And out in the field, you eat wherever you are. That means half-open cans rotting in the heat, bread growing mould before you can finish it, and scraps that draw rats in the night. You start associating food with flies because they're always buzzing around it before you get a bite in. Rotting vegetation is everywhere. The jungle is alive, but it's also constantly dying. Fallen branches, dead leaves, and undergrowth turn into mush in the heat, giving off a sour, fungal reek. Mould blooms on everything: boots, gear, even your skin. That smell of wet mildew follows you into sleep, into patrols, into every breath. It's the scent of slow decay, and it tells you no matter how tough you are, this environment is tougher. And then, layered on top of all of it, comes the stench of waste, human waste. In bases, latrines overflow, barrels of excrement are burned with gasoline, sending up plumes of black, choking smoke that stick to your tongue when you breathe in. Out in the jungle, soldiers relieve themselves wherever they can, and the smell lingers long after. Mix that with the smell of dead animals, garbage piles, and unwashed bodies, and it's a bouquet of human misery. There's no polite way to say it. Vietnam stinks, but the worst smells are the ones tied to death. Blood has its own coppery tang, sharp and metallic. You smell it on bandages, on the ground after firefights, in the air after explosions. Burning flesh is worse. A greasy, nauseating odour that once smelled never leaves your memory. It gets inside you. A smell you swear you can taste for days after. Soldiers don't talk about it, but everyone knows it. The jungle carries it on the wind sometimes, reminding you that the war is never far away. The combination of all of these, sweat, mould, smoke, fuel, waste, blood, creates an atmosphere that never lets you feel clean. You can scrub yourself raw, douse yourself in cologne from a package sent by home, but within an hour the jungle has claimed you again. You are part of the stink, and the stink is part of you. Some men joke about it. They laugh about how bad they smell, about how no woman back home would come within 10 feet of them. Others gag at the worst of it, pinching their noses when latrines burn, or when a fellow soldier hasn't changed his socks in a week. But most just stop noticing after a while. The human nose adapts, and the brain tunes it out, until a breeze shifts, and you're reminded all over again just how foul the air around you really is. And yet, strangely, these smells become markers of memory. Soldiers who came back decades later say the first thing they remembered wasn't what they saw, it was what they smelled. The gasoline, the mildew, the smoke of cheap cigarettes. It all came rushing back, more vivid than any photograph. The war imprinted itself on the senses in ways you couldn't wash away. Out here, the smell of Vietnam isn't just unpleasant, it's oppressive. It clings to you, shapes your mood, makes everything feel heavier. And when you add in the fear, the exhaustion, the endless work, it's no wonder so many men started looking for ways to escape, even if only for a few hours. When the world around you reeks of rot and sweat and smoke, the promise of something that takes the edge off, something that numbs your nose as well as your mind, becomes impossible to resist. The jungle is awake now, louder and hotter by the minute, and the day stretches in front of you like an endless path of mud. You can already feel the fatigue pressing down, the sense that the hours ahead will be long and unforgiving. The stench doesn't fade. It grows heavier as the sun climbs. And with every breath you take, you're reminded that out here, there's no escape from what surrounds you. By the time you've rubbed the grit from your eyes and forced your boots onto feet that feel like they've already marched 100 miles, it's time to think about breakfast. Not in the way you might back home, where breakfast means bacon, eggs, or pancakes that actually taste like food. Here, morning rations are more like a punishment wrapped in metal. The military calls them sea rations, which sounds organised and efficient. In reality, they're squat little cans stuffed with meat and beans that taste like they were cooked during World War I and then left to age gracefully in a warehouse until now. Each one is heavy, dull, and stamped with words that don't inspire confidence. Beef and gravy, pork slices with juices, ham and lima beans. That last one is legendary among soldiers, known as ham and motherfuckers. Open a can and you're greeted by a greyish block swimming in a film of fat that clings to the lid and your fingers. Opening the can is half the battle. You reach for your P38, the tiny folding can opener every soldier carries on a dog tag chain. It's sharp, it's simple, and it's a godsend when it works. But it's also a frustration when you're tired, your hands are shaking, and the can seems welded shut. You jab, twist, curse under your breath, and finally pry it open, only to be hit with the metallic tang of preserved meat. The smell mixes with the already awful jungle air, and suddenly you're not hungry anymore. But hunger isn't optional. Calories keep you moving, and out here, you need every bit of energy you can get. So you dig in with a spoon, or, if you're too impatient, a pocket knife. The texture is somewhere between rubber and glue, the taste closer to cardboard than pork. Sometimes you chew without swallowing right away, giving yourself time to convince your stomach it won't revolt. Other times you just shovel it down as quickly as possible, hoping speed will disguise the flavour. Then there are the crackers, hard rectangles of baked flour that look like food but could double as construction material. Bite into one and it shatters into dried dust that sticks to your teeth and throat, forcing you to gulp water that tastes faintly of iodine. Soldiers joke about using them to patch holes in helicopters or build bunkers. They're only edible if you smear them with a tiny packet of peanut butter or cheese spread that sometimes comes in the box, but even that is hit or miss. Peanut butter can be oily one day and a solid brick the next, and the cheese spread glows an unnatural shade of orange that makes you wonder if it's actually food or just an industrial byproduct. Every once in a while you'll get a can of fruit cocktail. That's the jackpot. Syrupy chunks of peach and pear that taste like something from another world. A reminder that sweetness exists. Men trade, hoard, and fight over those cans. They're worth more than cigarettes in some units. Opening one feels like Christmas, even if the fruit is mushy and the syrup sticks your fingers together for hours. But the real focus of breakfast isn't the food, it's the coffee. Instant coffee crystals, packed in a little envelope, meant to dissolve in hot water, but just as likely to clump together into bitter lumps. The powder smells burnt before you even add water, like it was roasted too long by someone who hated coffee and wanted to make sure nobody else enjoyed it either. Mix it with water from your canteen, and you get a liquid that looks like motor oil and tastes like regret. Soldiers joke that it could strip paint, clean rifles, or kill jungle leeches if poured directly on them. Still, you drink it. Not because it tastes good, but because it's the only thing standing between you and falling asleep mid-march. The caffeine kicks like a mule, hitting your bloodstream fast on an empty stomach, leaving your hands twitchy and your nerves jangling. Some guys make it so strong the spoon stands up in the cup, gulping it down like medicine. Others water it down until it's more like dirty dishwater. Either way, it never feels refreshing. It's survival in liquid form. The ritual of making coffee is almost comforting, even if the result is awful. Heating water in a dented canteen cup over a tiny fuel tab, stirring in the crystals, watching the steam rise into the damp air. For a moment, it feels like normal life, like sitting at a kitchen table back home, only with the soundtrack of helicopters and gunfire in the distance. The smell may be acrid, the taste may be awful, but it's familiar. And out here, familiarity is rare. Breakfast is eaten quickly, usually sitting on the ground or on your pack, rifle never far from your side. There's no dining table, no chatter about weekend plans, just men squatting in the mud, chewing mechanically, eyes scanning the tree line even as they pretend to focus on their food. You don't eat to enjoy, you eat to get it over with. Sometimes you trade. A can of beans for someone else's crackers, a pack of cigarettes for that precious fruit cocktail, 2 instant coffees for 1 packet of hot chocolate mix. The bartering keeps you occupied, gives you something to argue about besides the war itself. Some men save their best rations for later, hoarding them like treasure. Others eat everything immediately, figuring tomorrow is uncertain enough that saving anything is foolish. The worst part isn't the taste, though. It's the repetition. Day after day, the same cans, the same coffee, the same crackers that break your teeth. After weeks, you can predict the content of the ration box by weight, and the excitement is gone. Everything tastes the same, salty, metallic, bland. Food becomes another chore, another reminder that comfort doesn't exist here. Yet even with the monotony, there are moments when those rations become more than just fuel. A shared can of fruit passed around the squad, a laugh about how bad the coffee is, a pack of crackers handed to the guy who hasn't eaten yet. Small gestures that remind you you're not alone. Out here, sometimes survival isn't about what you eat, but about who you share it with. Once breakfast is over, the trash is stuffed into empty cans, buried in shallow pits, or tossed onto growing piles that attract rats the size of cats. The smell of spoiled rations joins the already overwhelming cocktail of odours in the air. The coffee leaves a bitter aftertaste that lingers in your mouth, mixing with the stale taste of cigarettes. Your stomach feels heavy, but not satisfied, like you filled it with lead instead of food. The men pack up quickly, stomping out fuel tabs, stuffing empty packets into pockets. The jungle doesn't wait. Neither do the officers. The day's work, patrols, marches, ambushes, or maybe just endless digging, will begin whether you've digested or not. The rations might sit in your gut like a brick, but they'll carry you through the next few hours until hunger gnaws at you again, and you're forced to repeat the whole ritual. As you sling your pack over your shoulder, The taste of coffee still biting at your tongue, you realise this is how every day begins. Not with comfort, not with energy, but with a compromise between hunger and disgust. And as the heat builds, as the jungle noise rises, as the smell thickens in your nose, you know it'll only get harder from here. The moment breakfast is over, you're reminded that what you put on your body can be just as punishing as what you put into it. The uniform is supposed to protect you, keep you alive, shield you from the elements. In Vietnam, it feels like the jungle is winning that battle every single day. The standard issue boots look tough when they're new. Thick soles, reinforced stitching, designed for rough terrain. But after weeks in the mud, they turn against you. The jungle eats leather, the way fire eats wood. Constant rain soaks through, drying never really happens. And soon the boots feel less like gear, and more like sponges tied to your feet. Every step squishes, the water trapped inside rubbing your skin raw until blisters open up and spread. Blisters don't stay blisters out here. They tear, get infected, and turn into open wounds that never heal. You stuff your feet back into the boots anyway, because there's no alternative. Barefoot isn't an option when sharp bamboo stalks, jagged rocks, and snakes wait in the undergrowth. Your socks are supposed to help, but they don't. Cotton turns into wet rags the moment you start sweating, and even the newer synthetic blends quickly reek of mildew. Soldiers are told to change their socks often, but there aren't enough dry pairs to go around. You might wring them out at night, hang them on a line, and hope the morning sun does its job. By dawn, they're just as damp as before. So you slide them back on, knowing they're already carrying the bacteria that will chew through your skin if given the chance. Trench foot isn't a distant memory from World War I. It's right here waiting. The soles of your feet turn white, soft and spongy, painful to touch, and yet you march on them for miles every day. The uniform itself is no better. Heavy cotton fatigues that trap heat and cling to sweat like they're designed to make you miserable. They're supposed to be durable, and maybe they are, but that just means you're trapped in them longer. The fabric never breathes. Once it's wet, it stays wet, holding the damp against your skin until it breaks out in rashes that itch and burn. The collars rub raw spots into your neck, the waist digs into your stomach, and the cuffs stay stiff with dried mud. After a few weeks, the whole thing smells like a mouldy basement mixed with body odour, and there's no washing machine waiting to rescue it. You might dunk it in a river, but the water's as dirty as the fabric, and the result is the same. Foul-smelling clothes that chafe your skin until you bleed. Sweat doesn't just soak the fabric. It creates salt lines that stiffen the material, turning your shirt into sandpaper against your shoulders and your pants into boards that scrape your thighs. Every step grinds the fabric against raw patches until the skin breaks down into sores. And once your skin splits, the jungle takes its chance. Fungus grows in the creases of your body, from your groin to your armpits to the spaces between your toes. Red, inflamed patches spread overnight, stinging every time you move. There's no cream, no quick cure. You just scratch until it bleeds and hope it doesn't spread too far. The helmet strapped to your head adds its own misery. It's heavy, hot, and digs into your scalp. Sweat runs down from under the liner, stinging your eyes, and the straps rub your chin raw until you develop a permanent line of irritation. The helmet is meant to save your life, but most of the time it feels like a punishment you're forced to carry. You can't take it off, because the one time you do might be the time a sniper's bullet finds you. So you wear it, sweat pooling in the padding, mildew forming where the cloth never fully dries, and you accept the headache it gives you as just another part of the uniform. The gear strapped around your waist and shoulders doesn't make things easier. Belts dig into your hips, webbing cuts across your chest, and ammo pouches bounce against your ribs with every step. The weight presses into your skin until deep grooves form, tender and sore. After long patrols, you peel the straps away and see angry red lines carved into your body. And there's no relief, because the next day you put it all back on and do it again. Skin infections are everywhere. A small nick from a thorn or a scratch from your gear turns into a festering sore within days. Pus seeps, the edges swell, and the pain makes every movement harder. There are no clean bandages in the field, no sterile wipes. You wrap it in whatever cloth you can spare, maybe tape it up if you're lucky, and keep moving. Antibiotics are rationed, often saved for the worst cases, so you live with the infections as long as you can. For some men, that means carrying open wounds for weeks at a time. And then there are the bugs. Lice burrow into your clothes, biting until your skin is dotted with angry welts. Mosquitoes attack any patch of exposed flesh, leaving raised bumps that swell and ooze when scratched. Leeches wait in puddles, latching onto your legs when you wade through water, swelling fat with your blood until you have to burn them off with a cigarette. Each bite is another risk for infection, another source of irritation, another reminder that the jungle doesn't just surround you, it consumes you. Men talk about home, about crisp uniforms and polished shoes, about showers that actually get you clean. But out here, the uniform is your second skin, and it's always filthy. Even when new replacements arrive, fresh from supply depots, within days they look just as bad as the old ones. There's no such thing as clean in the field, only less dirty than yesterday. The boots never dry, the uniforms never stop itching, the skin never fully heals. Every morning you strap the misery back on and carry it into the jungle. And as much as you complain, as much as you joke about it, you know you can't take it off. Because out here, the uniform isn't just clothing. It's armour against a world that wants to break you down piece by piece. The jungle isn't silent, not even for a moment. From the second you wake up to the second you try to close your eyes again, there's a constant soundtrack pressing into your ears. It's not the kind of soundscape you'd ever want on a record. It's a mixture of machines, weapons, voices, and insects that blend into one endless wall of noise you can never fully tune out. The helicopters are the loudest and the most unforgettable. You hear them long before you see them, the deep whoop 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 of rotor blades cutting through the air like a giant mechanical heartbeat. They shake the ground as they come in, sending vibrations through your chest and rattling the dog tags around your neck. When they're close, the sound swallows everything else. Men shout to each other just inches away and can barely be heard. Dirt and debris whip up in choking clouds, and the whole world feels like it's vibrating apart. Those helicopters are lifelines. They bring supplies, carry men to new landing zones, haul out the wounded, and sometimes drop destruction on the jungle below. But the sound of them is more than just utility. It becomes psychological. Every time you hear it, your nerves spike. Because helicopters don't come without reason. They mean movement. They mean casualties. They mean the war is happening right now, closer than you'd like. When they fade into the distance, the sound doesn't disappear from your head. The blades leave a ghost echo, still thumping in your ears, still pulsing through your skull. Some men swear they hear helicopters even in silence, the phantom noise following them long after the machines are gone. It's a sound that burrows into you, refuses to let go. And years later, men back home hear it again in their sleep. Then there's the gunfire. Sharp cracks that split the air without warning, echoing through the trees. Sometimes it's far away, just a background reminder that the jungle is bigger than your little patch of mud. Other times it's terrifyingly close, sudden bursts that make you drop flat before your brain even registers what's happening. The sound doesn't give you time to think. It's violent, immediate and unpredictable. The M16s carried by your squad pop in rapid bursts, a rattling staccato that feels mechanical, almost detached from the men firing them. The AK-47s on the other side answer back with a deeper, slower rhythm, a sound you learn to distinguish instantly. The two weapons talking to each other through the jungle, each round tearing through leaves, dirt or flesh. Mortars thump with a low, stomach-deep boom before whistling overhead, exploding into concussive roars that shake the ground. Artillery in the distance adds another layer, a dull, endless pounding that never really stops. It's not just combat either. The jungle itself carries sound in strange ways. A single shot can echo through the trees, bouncing and distorting until you can't tell where it came from. A firefight might sound like it's surrounding you, even if it's a mile away. You never fully trust your ears, and that uncertainty makes every noise worse. On quieter days, the soundtrack shifts, but never softens. Radios crackle with static, voices cutting in and out with half-heard words, coordinates and commands. Some men hum under their breath, tuneless sounds just to fill the space. Others curse, mutter, or laugh too loudly, their voices carrying in ways they don't realise. And always, the background layer of the jungle itself. Cicadas screaming, frogs croaking, birds shrieking like they're mocking you. Nature is so loud here that silence doesn't exist. Night brings its own noises. The darkness amplifies every rustle, every snapped twig, every shuffle in the undergrowth. You hear movement, but you don't know if it's an animal, a fellow soldier, or something else entirely. Men lie awake, listening to their own heartbeats, pounding louder than the insects, straining to separate real danger from the tricks the jungle plays. Sometimes gunfire erupts at shadows, nerves stretched too thin, bullets tearing through nothing but leaves. The soundtrack is relentless. Helicopters, gunfire, explosions, radios, insects, footsteps, voices, all blending into a wall of sound that never lets you rest. Sleep is shallow, because even in dreams you hear the thump of rotors or the crack of rifles. The brain never gets quiet, always listening, always waiting for the next sound that means it's time to dive for cover. And beneath it all, there's the silence that never really is silence. The moments between helicopters, between bursts of gunfire, between shouts. The stillness that feels heavy, unnatural, like the jungle is holding its breath. Those pauses are the worst, because they don't last. You know the noise is coming back. You know it's just a matter of time. And that anticipation becomes its own kind of noise, a roar inside your skull that doesn't stop. Some men try to drown it out with music from battered cassette players, tinny rock songs bleeding through static. Others hum, sing, or tell stories too loudly, as if making their own noise will push the war sounds further away. but it never really works. The helicopters return, the gunfire cracks, the jungle screams, and the war's soundtrack drowns everything else again. By the time you lie down at night, ears ringing from the day, you know you'll hear it all again in the morning. Out here, sound is as constant as the heat, as unavoidable as the smell, as punishing as the uniform on your skin. The war never goes quiet, not for a second. The sun doesn't rise gently in Vietnam. It doesn't creep up over the horizon with soft morning light. It slams into you, harsh and heavy, turning the jungle into a furnace before you've even finished choking down your first cigarette of the day. Within minutes, sweat pours off your body, soaking your uniform, dripping into your eyes, stinging the raw spots on your skin. The heat here doesn't just make you uncomfortable. It breaks you down, slowly, relentlessly, until you're living in a constant state of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. You feel it the moment you step out of the tent. The air presses against you like a wet blanket straight from the fire. There's no breeze, no relief, no shade thick enough to keep the temperature from seeping into your bones. Your shirt clings to you, heavy with moisture, before you've walked 10 steps. Sweat pools in your boots, squishes between your toes, and mixes with the blisters you've been nursing since your first patrol. Your socks are already damp, and you know they'll stay that way until night, when they'll be even wetter from the jungle floor. Your helmet traps the heat against your head, cooking your scalp until it feels like your skull itself is sweating. You lift it for a second, wipe your forehead with the back of your hand, and then put it back on, because leaving it off isn't an option. The liner smells like mildew and salt, the straps rubbing a sore spot into your chin. Within minutes, sweat drips down the inside and into your eyes again. You can't win. The humidity is the worst part. It's not just hot, it's wet hot. The kind of air that feels like soup. Every breath feels thick, heavy, and unsatisfying. You inhale and exhale, but never feel refreshed. Your lungs ache like you're drowning, and sometimes you think maybe you are. The jungle never dries. The rain falls, the heat rises, and the water turns into steam that clings to you. Your skin is never dry. Your clothes are never dry. Even your rifle feels damp, the metal slick under your palms. By mid-morning, the sweat has soaked everything you're wearing. Your fatigues are plastered to your back. Your thighs rub against the wet fabric until they burn, and your belt sticks to your skin like glue. You can feel salt crystals forming where the sweat dries in streaks, stiffening the fabric into abrasive lines that scrape your shoulders and sides. Every movement rubs, grinds, irritates. You shift, tug, scratch, but nothing helps. The discomfort is constant, like a dull ache you carry with you everywhere. The men around you look just as miserable. Everyone is drenched, their uniforms 2 shades darker from sweat. Helmets are streaked with salt. Boots leave wet prints with every step. Nobody looks fresh. Nobody smells decent. You all carry the same odour of sweat, mildew, cigarettes, and despair. And yet nobody complains too loudly, because there's no point. You can't escape it. The heat owns you. Dehydration is always lurking, even when you think you're drinking enough. The water in your canteen tastes like iodine, metallic and bitter, but you gulp it down anyway. Your mouth is constantly dry, your tongue sticking to your teeth, your lips cracked and bleeding. You sweat out more than you can drink in, and the dizziness creeps up on you if you're not careful. Some men collapse in the fields, eyes rolling back, bodies twitching from heat stroke. Out here, heat isn't just an inconvenience. It's another enemy, invisible but deadly. And as if the heat and sweat weren't enough, the mosquitoes arrive to finish the job. They're everywhere. Clouds of them rise from puddles, from swampy ditches, from the long grass you're forced to wade through. They whine in your ears, land on your neck, swarm your hands, bite through your clothing. You slap at them constantly, leaving red smears on your arms, your legs, your face. For every one you kill, 10 more take its place. They bite in places you didn't think they could reach. Behind your ears, inside your boots, along your waistline. You wake up with bites on your eyelids, your knuckles, even between your fingers. The welts swell, itch, and ooze when you scratch them, but you can't stop scratching. Some men dig at their skin until they bleed, desperate for relief. The mosquitoes don't care. They come back anyway, drawn onto the salt in your sweat, to the heat of your body, to the blood they know is just under the skin. You smear repellent on yourself, thick greasy layers of it, but it barely slows them down. The smell is chemical, sharp enough to make your eyes water, but still the mosquitoes land on top of it, drilling their needles through the film. You burn mosquito coils, wave your hands in the air, cover yourself in smoke from cigarettes. But nothing works. They are relentless, unbothered by your attempts to fight back. And it's not just the itching. Every bite is a threat. Malaria, dengue, yellow fever, diseases carried by wings too small to see in the dark. You take the anti-malarial pills, choking down the chalky tablets each morning, but they don't feel like enough. You know men who still got sick despite taking them. Men who shook in their cots for days, burning with fever, eyes glazed with delirium. The mosquitoes aren't just annoying, they're lethal. And they never stop coming. At night, when you try to sleep, they buzz around your ears, whining just loud enough to keep you awake. You swat in the dark, but you're too tired to kill them all. You cover yourself with a blanket despite the heat, suffocating under the heavy fabric just to keep them off your skin. It works for a while, until the sweat makes you throw it off and you're exposed again. They feast on you while you dream, and in the morning you wake up covered in new bites, your skin a map of raised red welts. Flies add to the torment. They swarm your food, your face, your wounds. They land on your lips, crawl into your ears, stick to your sweat. You wave them away, but they come back, persistent, fearless. The jungle is alive with insects, and you are just another part of the ecosystem. They treat you like food, because out here, you are. Some men joke about the mosquitoes being bigger than helicopters, about how they could carry you away if they worked together. Others curse, slap, and rage at them, as if anger could keep them at bay. But most just endure, scratching, swatting, accepting that this is the price of every step in Vietnam. The bugs own the day as much as the heat does, and together they grind you down, day after day, until you stop remembering what it feels like to be comfortable. The jungle doesn't care how tough you are. It doesn't care how many battles you've survived, or how many medals you've earned. It wears you down through sheer persistence, the endless combination of heat, sweat, and insects gnawing at your willpower. You can fight an enemy with bullets. You can't fight the air, the water, the mosquitoes. You just take it, let it wear you down, and hope your body holds out a little longer. And the worst part is knowing tomorrow will be the same. The heat will slam down again. The sweat will soak you again. The mosquitoes will swarm again. There's no reprieve, no vacation, no break from the environment itself. Out here, the war isn't just fought against men. It's fought against the land, against the air, against the things too small to see. And more often than not, it feels like the land is winning. The heat and the mosquitoes never let up, but the truth is, they're not the only thing pressing down on you. Sweat can soak your uniform, bugs can bleed you dry, but it's fear that really eats you alive. Out here, fear isn't an occasional visitor. It's a roommate. It sits with you at breakfast. It marches with you through the jungle. It curls up beside you when you try to sleep. You don't get to escape it, not for a single moment. At first, when you're fresh off the plane and still wide-eyed with nerves, fear feels sharp. Every sound makes your head snap around. Every shadow looks like an ambush waiting to happen. You grip your rifle so tightly your knuckles ache, and you can't tell if the pounding in your ears is your heart or distant gunfire. The veterans laugh quietly, not because they don't understand, but because they remember what it was like to feel that roar. Fear is a new coat that never fits right at the beginning, but once you've been in country for a while, it starts to mould itself into your skin until it's part of you. It doesn't fade, it just changes shape. After a few months, you're not jumping at every sound anymore. Instead, fear becomes a dull throb, always there, humming in the background of your mind. You learn to walk through it, to laugh over it, to talk about home like you're not worried about making it through the week. But underneath, the fear is still chewing at you, gnawing at your insides like termites in wood. You can't cut it out, can't kill it, can't even name it half the time. It's just there. Patrols are the worst. You step into the jungle knowing full well you're walking into someone else's territory. Every vine could be hiding tripwire. Every patch of grass could be concealing a punjai steak smeared with filth. Every pile of leaves could hide a landmine waiting to rip through your legs. You know they're out there, and the not knowing eats at you more than the heat or the sweat or the bugs. You find yourself staring at the ground constantly, scanning for wires, for holes, for anything out of place, and even when you don't see anything, your stomach churns with the certainty that it's just luck keeping you whole. The jungle doesn't help. It plays tricks on you. Sounds echo, shadows shift, the thick green walls close in around you until you feel like you're being watched from every direction. And maybe you are. Maybe the rustle of branches is just the wind, or maybe it's the enemy crawling closer. Maybe the distant pop is just a branch snapping, or maybe it's the first shot of an ambush. You never know until it's too late, and that uncertainty is worse than anything else. Fear thrives in uncertainty. Night is its own monster. Sitting in the dark, clutching your rifle, eyes straining to pierce the blackness, ears twitching at every sound. A twig snaps, a frog croaks, a mosquito buzzes too close to your ear, and your nerves scream that it's danger. You sweat through the fear, whisper to yourself that it's nothing, that it's just the jungle being the jungle. But deep down you don't believe it. Every night feels like it could be your last. Sleep is shallow, broken, always interrupted by jolts of panic when you think you hear footsteps outside the perimeter. Some men stay awake the entire shift, not because they want to, but because fear won't let them close their eyes. And then there's the fear you don't talk about, the fear of your own side. Friendly fire isn't rare. Miscommunication, nerves, bad aim, all of it adds up. You've heard the stories, seen the results. A wrong call on the radio, a trigger pulled too fast, and suddenly it's your own guys shooting at you. That kind of fear is harder to swallow because it eats away at trust. You want to believe the man next to you will cover your back, but fear whispers that he might be the one who ends you. Fear doesn't just live in the jungle, though. It lives in the airfields, in the convoys, even in the supposedly safe bases. Mortar rounds come without warning, exploding in the middle of a poker game or while you're trying to shave. The sirens wail, but by then it's already too late. You learn to freeze for a split second when you hear the whistle, wondering if the next one has your name on it. You run for cover, hit the dirt, but in that half second before impact, fear has already wrapped itself around your chest and squeezed. It shows up in small ways too, in the way your hands tremble when you light a cigarette, in the way your eyes dart constantly to the tree line, in the way you flinch when a helicopter passes overhead, even though it's friendly. You stop noticing it after a while, because fear becomes your baseline. You don't think about living without it, because you can't imagine it anymore. Some men try to laugh it off, turning fear into jokes, pretending it doesn't get to them. Others drink, smoke, pop pills, anything to blur the edges, to take the sharpness away. Some get quiet, retreat into themselves, staring at nothing while the rest of the squad talks around them. Everyone has their way of coping, but nobody escapes it. Even the hardest, toughest men you meet out here carry fear. They just hide it better. The cruel thing about fear is how it compounds. It's not just about dying. It's about how you might die. A bullet to the head is one thing, but what about stepping on a mine and losing your legs? What about infection, rotting slowly in a field hospital, or being burned alive in a helicopter crash? The imagination fills in the blanks with horrors worse than reality, and fear feeds on that imagination. Every possibility feels real, because out here it is. And yet you keep moving. Fear doesn't paralyze you, not if you want to survive. You walk through it, push past it, act like it isn't there. Even though it's screaming in your ears, you pull the trigger when you need to, dive into the mud when you have to, and get up again even though your body is shaking. Fear doesn't stop you. It just makes every action heavier, every breath harder, every step longer. When men talk about Vietnam years later, they don't always talk about the heat, or the mosquitoes, or the food. They talk about the fear, the constant weight of it, the way it never left, the way it came home with them long after the jungle was behind them. Fear that seeped into their bones, into their memories, into their dreams. Fear that didn't stay in Vietnam, but followed them into bedrooms, living rooms, quiet streets back home. Fear that never left, because once you've lived with it this long, it becomes part of you. You don't conquer fear in Vietnam. You endure it. You carry it like your pack, heavy and unshakable. You wake up with it, march with it, sleep with it, and you know tomorrow it'll be there again, waiting, patient, ready to remind you that out here you are never safe. The first thing a lot of men reach for in the morning isn't their rifle, their canteen, or even their boots. It's a cigarette. Before the sun fully clears the horizon, before the coffee boils in battered cups, the paper packs are already being tapped against palms, the thin sticks pulled out with practice fingers. Out here, cigarettes are as much a part of life as water and rations. They come in the sea ration boxes, tucked neatly beside the cans of beans and crackers, 4 or 5 to a pack, as if the army knew exactly how badly men would need them. You wake up sticky with sweat, body aching, nerves already humming from the night before. Your hands reach automatically for the little white tube. The lighter sparks, the end flares, and within seconds the smoke curls into your lungs, filling them with something sharp and chemical, but comforting all the same. It's the closest thing to peace you're going to get all day. The first drag burns in the chest. It scratches at your throat, makes your eyes water slightly, but then it levels out. The nicotine hits your bloodstream, and for just a moment you feel lighter. Your heart steadies, your mind slows, your body seems to stop screaming at you about the heat, the bugs, the fear. It's not happiness, it's not joy, it's relief. And relief is priceless here. Everyone smokes. Officers, grunts, the guys driving the supply trucks, the medics, the cooks, even men who never touched a cigarette before the war find themselves smoking within weeks. It starts as a way to pass the time, a way to blend in, a way to quiet nerves when the jungle won't stop buzzing in your ears. But soon it's not optional. It's part of the routine, part of the survival kit. The ritual matters as much as the cigarette itself. The way you tap the pack, pull one free with your lips, cup your hands around the lighter to shield the flame from the breeze. The first drag, the slow exhale, the curl of smoke drifting into the humid air. It gives shape to the morning. Something to cling to when everything else feels uncertain. No matter how bad the night was, no matter what waits in the jungle, there's always that cigarette. The smoke hangs heavy in the tents, in the foxholes, in the bunkers. Men cough, spit, hack black phlegm onto the ground, but light up again anyway. The taste is bitter, acrid, a mix of tobacco and paper that never really tastes good, but you stop noticing after a while. It's the sensation, the act, the way the nicotine settles your nerves. Out here the cigarette isn't about pleasure, it's about survival. Sometimes the cigarette is the only thing keeping hands from shaking. Before patrol, men light up puffing quickly, almost desperately, trying to calm their nerves before stepping into the green hell outside camp. The smoke mixes with insect repellent, with the smell of sweat and mildew, with the ever-present stink of diesel fuel. It doesn't mask anything. It just adds another layer to the dense, choking air. But it doesn't matter. For those few minutes, the world feels slightly more manageable. The mornings are filled with smoke. Soldiers squatting in the mud, helmets pushed back, rifles across their laps, cigarettes glowing faintly in the dim light. They pass matches back and forth, joke about who smokes too fast, argue over which brand is best. Lucky Strikes, Camels, Pall Malls. It doesn't matter much. They all taste the same after a while. Some men crush the ration cigarettes and roll their own, stuffing the paper with whatever tobacco they can scrounge, trying to make it last longer. Others save half a smoke for later, tucking it carefully behind their ear like a precious treasure. The army doesn't discourage it. In fact, it encourages it. Cigarettes are cheap, plentiful, and built into the daily ration. It's easier to keep men calm and compliant when they have nicotine in their system. Officers know it, supply clerks know it, the tobacco companies definitely know it. The war and the smoke go hand in hand, one feeding the other. By the time a man rotates home, his lungs are lined with tar, his teeth stained yellow, his pockets still searching for a pack that isn't there. The cigarette is more than just a morning habit. It's a companion. It's there when you're waiting in the rain, sitting in a foxhole, marching through endless mud. It's there when you're scared, when you're tired, when you're so bored you think your brain might turn to mush, Light up, drag deep, exhale. The repetition keeps you sane. The smoke fills the silence when nobody wants to talk. It gives your hands something to do when your nerves won't let you sit still. Men smoke before patrols, during patrols, after patrols. They smoke on breaks, leaning against trees, rifles slung over shoulders, helmets tilted low. They smoke in the middle of firefights, crouched behind cover, bullets snapping overhead, lighters flicking in trembling hands. They smoke after combat, the first drag mixing with the metallic tang of blood and cordite in the air, the nicotine cutting through the adrenaline crashing in their veins. The cigarette becomes part of every memory. Ask a soldier about his first firefight, and he'll tell you about the cigarette he lit afterward, hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. Ask about long nights on watch, and he'll tell you about the glow of burning tips in the darkness, little dots of orange scattered along the perimeter. Ask about waiting for the helicopter, and he'll tell you about the line of men, all smoking in silence, the smoke trailing upward as the rotors beat the air. It doesn't matter that the cigarettes are slowly killing you. Out here, everything is trying to kill you. Bullets, mines, disease, the jungle itself. A cigarette feels almost harmless by comparison. If you're going to die anyway, you might as well take the edge off in the meantime. That's the logic. And it makes sense when every day feels like it could be your last. Some men chain smoke, one after the other, never letting their hands be empty. Others ration them carefully, lighting up only when absolutely necessary, as if saving smokes could somehow save their sanity. But nobody quits. Out here, quitting isn't even a thought. The cigarette is as essential as the rifle. You don't question it. You just keep lighting them, day after day, until you stop counting how many you've had. The first cigarette of the day isn't just about nicotine, it's about control. Out here, you don't control much. Orders come down from officers you've never met. The jungle dictates your pace. The enemy decides when a firefight begins. Even the weather mocks you, dumping rain without warning or baking you alive under the sun. But the cigarette is yours. You light it, you drag it, you finish it. For 5 minutes, the world belongs to you. And when the last drag is gone, the butt crushed into the mud, reality returns. The heat presses in, the mosquitoes swarm, the fear settles back into your chest. But for those 5 minutes, it was quieter. For those 5 minutes, you remembered what it felt like to breathe without panic. That's why you light another one when you can, why you reach for the pack before your boots, before your rifle, before anything else. Because in Vietnam, the cigarette isn't just smoke. It's the thin line between losing your mind and holding it together for one more day. Cigarettes are the first ritual of the day, but they're not the only crutch soldiers carry. Just as common, and sometimes even more dangerous, is the bottle. Out here, alcohol isn't just a luxury. It's medicine, entertainment, and escape all rolled into one. The army might not officially encourage it, but everyone knows it's everywhere. It flows through canteens, through hidden bottles, through the veins of men trying to blur out the war for a few hours at a time. The first sip usually comes earlier than you'd think. Back home, drinking before noon is a sign of a problem. In Vietnam, it's a sign of survival. By mid-morning, the heat is already pressing down, the fear has already crawled into your chest, and the sweat has already soaked through your clothes. A cigarette takes the edge off, sure, but for some men, only booze really quiets the nerves. You tip your canteen back, and instead of water, Your throat burns with whiskey or rum that's been smuggled in, traded for, or poured out of some dented bottle passed around the night before. The canteen is the perfect disguise. Nobody looks twice at a soldier drinking from one, but the contents aren't always water. Sometimes it's gin cup with warm Kool-Aid powder to mask the bite. Sometimes it's bourbon, watered down just enough to trick your taste buds into thinking it's safer. Sometimes it's local rice wine, cloudy and pungent, bought cheap from villagers, strong enough to peel paint, and guaranteed to leave you with a headache that feels like an artillery round went off inside your skull. The hidden bottles are everywhere, stashed in footlockers, tucked into duffel bags, buried under spare socks. Men wrap them in towels or slip them into rucksacks, always within reach but out of sight from officers who pretend not to notice. The PX stores sell plenty too, rows of whiskey, vodka, and beer cans that fly off the shelves the moment they're stocked. Officially, it's for off-duty hours. Unofficially, the bottles find their way into the field, sloshing in packs beside rifles and ammo. Beer is the most common, but it's not the kind of beer you'd want to savour. The cans are warm, the labels faded, the taste metallic from sitting too long in warehouses and shipping containers. Still, when the lid hisses open and the foam spills over your fingers, it feels like a small victory. Men sit in the mud, boots unlaced, helmets tossed aside, passing cans back and forth, laughing louder than they should. The beer isn't good, but it's beer, and that's enough. Whiskey and rum hit harder, and that's the point. A few swigs, and the jungle feels a little less oppressive. The fear dulls, the insects fade into the background. The sweat doesn't bother you as much. For a short time, the war blurs around the edges. You don't think about patrols, about ambushes, about friends who didn't wake up that morning. You just drink, laugh, maybe sing badly with the others. Your voice is slurring as the bottle makes its rounds. But booze in Vietnam is more than just relaxation. It's a crutch for men who can't deal with the constant pressure, the constant waiting, the constant dread. Some drink to sleep, knocking back half a bottle, so they don't lie awake listening for footsteps in the dark. Some drink to forget, drowning out the images burned into their minds from the last firefight. Some drink just because it's the only thing that makes the hours move faster. Out here, every day feels endless. Alcohol speeds them along. It doesn't come without cost. Hangovers in this heat are brutal. You wake up with your tongue glued to the roof of your mouth, your head pounding like artillery fire, your stomach twisting at the smell of breakfast rations. The sweat pours out faster, the dehydration hits harder, and suddenly the jungle feels like it's trying to bury you alive. But you still drink again the next night, because the alternative is lying awake with your own thoughts, and that's worse. Fights break out over bottles. Two men, drunk and restless, arguing over something meaningless until fists fly. Helmets are grabbed as weapons, and someone ends up bleeding in the mud. Officers try to keep order, but they know they can't stamp it out completely. As long as men are fighting the war, they're going to drink. It's been true in every conflict, and Vietnam is no different. Sometimes, booze makes the war even more dangerous. Men stumble into patrols half drunk, their reflexes dulled, their aim sloppy. A trigger gets pulled too quickly, a grenade gets mishandled, and suddenly the squad is paying for one man's blurred senses. There are stories of accidents, of deaths caused not by enemy fire, but by bottles emptied too quickly. Everyone knows it happens, but nobody talks about it too loudly. it's easier to blame the jungle than the whiskey. Then there's the local brew. Villagers sell rice wine in reused bottles, cloudy liquid with bits floating in it, smelling like gasoline mixed with sour fruit. It's cheap, it's strong, and it knocks you flat in half the time as American whiskey. Soldiers buy it anyway, trade cigarettes or candy for a swig, laughing as they cough and gag on the burn. Sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's poison. Men go blind, collapse in the dirt, or spend 2 days curled in agony after drinking the wrong batch. Still, the demand never stops. The need to escape is stronger than the fear of what's in the bottle. Alcohol becomes currency. A half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels can buy you a week of favours. Beer cans get traded for cigarettes, for chocolate, for clean socks. A hidden stash can make you popular fast, men crowding around your cot with grins, waiting for you to share. But it can also make you a target. Theft is common, bottles disappearing from packs when backs are turned, leading to quiet resentment or explosive confrontations. Booze fuels camaraderie, but it also fuels division. And yet, despite the risks, despite the accidents, despite the sickness, the bottles never stop flowing. They arrive in supply shipments, in care packages from home, in local markets that thrive on the soldiers' thirst. They're hidden in canteens, tucked into boots, carried onto helicopters, smuggled into tents. The war runs on bullets and bandages, but it also runs on booze. Without it, the strain might break more men than combat ever could. By evening, when the heat finally dips but the mosquitoes rise, the bottles come out again. Men sit in circles, passing them around, voices growing louder, laughter more unhinged. Someone starts singing, someone else tells a story that doesn't quite add up, and everyone pretends for a while that they're not in Vietnam, that they're not thousands of miles from home, that the jungle isn't waiting just outside the wire. For a few hours, the war feels further away. Then the bottles empty, the cigarettes burn down to the filter, and the reality settles back in. The laughter fades, the singing dies, and the men lie back in the dirt, stomachs churning, heads spinning, hoping they'll sleep through the night without the dreams creeping in. In the morning the cycle begins again. Canteens that should hold water hold whiskey instead, and the first sip burns down throats already raw from smoke. Out here, booze isn't just a habit, it's armour. Thin, fragile armour that cracks easily, but armour all the same. If the bottles kept men's nerves dulled and their nights blurry, the smoke rolling from paper tubes offered something different. Marijuana wasn't new to the world, but for American soldiers in Vietnam, it became almost a second uniform. Cheap, easy to find, and everywhere once you knew where to look. It was the escape that didn't need to be smuggled in from home. The jungle itself seemed to provide it, as if even the land knew the soldiers needed something more than cigarettes and whiskey to keep their sanity from snapping. The first thing about weed in Vietnam was the price. Back home, marijuana was something whispered about, tucked away in basements or passed quietly between college kids on campuses. In the States, it was illegal, hard to get, and expensive if you managed to find it. Over here, it was practically given away. A few dollars bought you a bag big enough to last weeks. Some soldiers said you could get enough to roll for a month for the price of a carton of cigarettes. Local kids would run up to you with hands full of it, offering handfuls wrapped in paper, smiling wide at the easiest business they'd ever do. It came in all forms. bags tied with string, bundles wrapped in banana leaves, sometimes even whole stalks if you knew the right person. The quality varied. Some was leafy and harsh, some sticky and potent enough to leave you glassy-eyed for hours. But nobody cared much about quality. Out here, it wasn't about taste or refinement. It was about escape. And escape was cheap, easy, and green. The ritual of rolling joints became as common as lighting cigarettes. Men would huddle together, passing around paper, carefully sprinkling the crumbled leaves inside, fingers moving quickly and expertly after weeks of practice. A match flared, the tip glowed, and the smoke drifted upward, sweet and earthy, different from the acrid sting of tobacco. The first drag made you cough, the second made you laugh, and by the third, you were somewhere else entirely. It wasn't like alcohol. Booze dulled the senses, left you stumbling, made you sloppy and slow. Weed took you sideways. The jungle still buzzed with insects, still echoed with distant artillery, still pressed down on you with its humid weight. But suddenly it all felt softer. The colours seemed sharper, the sounds less threatening, the sweat less unbearable. For a little while the war didn't feel so close. For a little while the men who couldn't stop shaking found themselves smiling. You'd see groups sitting in circles in the evenings, helmets pushed back, rifles leaning against trees, passing a joint from one cracked pair of lips to another. The laughter would start low, then spill out louder, echoing through the camp. Stories grew funnier, songs slurred into half-remembered lyrics, and for an hour or two it felt like you weren't in Vietnam at all. You were just young guys again, hanging out, passing time. We didn't stop at campfires, though. Men smoked on patrols, behind cover, even crouched in foxholes. Some swore it sharpened their senses, made them feel more in tune with the jungle, like they could hear the enemy coming before anyone else. Others admitted it slowed them down, made every sound feel distant, every danger less urgent. Either way, it didn't stop them from lighting up. The risk of a bullet seemed smaller when your mind was wrapped in a haze of smoke. Commanders knew they couldn't not know. The smell was everywhere, clinging to uniforms, drifting out of tents, mixing with the ever-present stink of sweat and fuel. Some tried to crack down, ordering searches, punishing men caught with bags of green. But the demand was too high, and the supply too easy. For every joint confiscated, 3 more were lit that night. In many units, officers simply looked the other way, pretending not to notice as long as the men still showed up when it mattered. The war was hard enough sober. If a little weed kept soldiers from breaking, maybe it wasn't the worst thing. It wasn't just the grunts either. Clerks, drivers, even some officers smoked when the stress piled up high enough. A few drew the line at alcohol, but marijuana slipped past that line easily, its sweet smoke a temptation too strong to ignore. The army might have been built on discipline, but discipline cracked fast under the weight of heat, fear, and boredom. And weed filled those cracks better than anything else. The culture around it grew quickly. Men gave it nicknames, made jokes, treated it like another part of the daily routine. Cheap escape, they called it, and that's exactly what it was. Roll it, light it, inhale. And for a little while, you weren't in a war zone. You were somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere kinder. It didn't erase the war, but it softened it, blurred it, made it survivable for another day. Not everyone smoked. Some men stayed away, either out of principle or fear of punishment. or simply because they didn't like how it felt. But even they couldn't escape the second-hand haze drifting through the tents, clinging to their uniforms, slipping into their lungs. Weed was as much a part of the air as smoke from cigarettes or exhaust from helicopters. You didn't have to touch it to be affected. It was everywhere, and it shaped the mood of entire camps. The downside was obvious, though few admitted it out loud. Some men got too high, lost in themselves, unable to react when they needed to. They moved slower, spoke slower, stared at the trees like they were seeing something nobody else could. In a war zone, that kind of detachment was dangerous. Accidents happened, weapons mishandled, orders misheard. Jokes turned into paranoia when someone smoked too much, and suddenly the laughter died into silence, eyes darting nervously at shadows. Weed might have dulled the war, but it didn't erase it. And sometimes the jungle crashed back in harder when the haze wore off. Still, the demand never slowed. The supply never stopped. Weed was too cheap, too easy, too tempting. Soldiers bought it from kids, from farmers, from anyone who had a handful to spare. They stashed it in socks, in helmets, in the folds of their packs. They rolled it in the dark, lit it in the rain, passed it in the middle of firefights. It was part of the rhythm of Vietnam, as constant as the mosquitoes, as common as the cigarettes, as ingrained as the fear. Years later, when men tried to explain what it was like, they didn't just talk about the firefights or the heat. They talked about the smell of marijuana in the camps, the haze that hung low in the evenings, the way it shaped the mood of entire squads. It wasn't a footnote, it was central. The cheap escape that kept men going, kept them from breaking, kept them from drowning in the weight of it all. We didn't win the war, didn't change the outcome, didn't erase the fear. But for countless men, it was the only thing that made each day survivable. And so they lit up again and again, letting the sweet smoke fill their lungs, blur their vision, soften their thoughts, and carry them somewhere else, anywhere else, for just a little while. Alcohol blurred the edges, marijuana softened the fear, but heroin was different. It wasn't just a crutch or a distraction. It was a trap that swallowed men whole. By the late years of the war, heroin was everywhere in Vietnam, slipping into the hands of soldiers like candy. Not the polished powder of some movie scene, but little plastic bags filled with white or brown powder, sold cheap on street corners, in alleys, even right outside the gates of American bases. It didn't take much. $5 could buy you a bag strong enough to knock you down for hours. 10 could keep you numb all weekend. Compared to prices back in the States, it was practically free. And that's what made it so dangerous. Soldiers who never touched a drug back home, who thought of heroin as something only addicts in big city alleys used, found themselves staring at the little plastic packets, listening to their buddies say, "Just try it once, it'll help." The first time was usually cautious. A line snorted, a small taste burned in a cigarette. The body relaxed, the mind slowed, and for a brief moment, Vietnam disappeared. The sweat, the insects, the fear, the sound of artillery, the endless green pressing in from every side. It all dissolved into warmth. Muscles unclenched, heart steadied, and the war seemed far away, like a bad dream fading with the morning light. And then, just like that, men were hooked. The high was too perfect, too strong, too easy. It wasn't like booze, which left you stumbling. It wasn't like marijuana, which sometimes twisted your thoughts into paranoia. Heroin smoothed everything out. It didn't matter that you were in a war zone. It didn't matter that death might be a few feet away. For those hours, none of it touched you. That's what made it irresistible. Plastic bags passed from hand to hand like candy bars. They were hidden in boots, tucked into helmets, stuffed into the lining of packs. Soldiers would sneak off during downtime, burn a little in a pipe, roll it into a joint, or more often dissolve it and inject. Needles were passed around casually, sometimes shared, hygiene forgotten in the haze. The risk of infection, of disease, didn't seem important compared to the relief the drug promised. The army tried to pretend it wasn't happening. At first, heroin was just a rumour, whispered about in the barracks, laughed off by officers who thought their men were tougher than that. But by 1970, it wasn't a rumour anymore. Entire squads were strung out, eyes glassy, bodies moving slow. Men nodded off mid-sentence, rifles slipping from their laps, heads drooping as they melted into the haze. Patrols were delayed, mistakes were made, and everyone knew why. The supply never stopped. Dealers lined the streets outside the bases, boys no older than 12 running up with outstretched hands, bags of powder hidden under their shirts. Vietnamese gangs saw opportunity, flooding the black market with heroin pure enough to floor a man in one hit. The US military couldn't seal the pipeline. Every checkpoint missed some. Every search turned up a fraction. The rest flowed in freely, and the soldiers kept buying. Addiction set in fast. A man who tried it one weekend might find himself needing it every morning just to get out of his cot. Withdrawal was brutal. Sweats, shakes, vomiting, a crawling pain under the skin that made it impossible to function. In the middle of a war, with fear already chewing at the edges of sanity, that kind of sickness was unbearable. So men didn't stop. They found ways to keep the bags coming no matter what. Canteens carried more than water. Some were filled with heroin dissolved in liquids, sipped slowly through the day. Syringes were hidden in socks, under floorboards, even taped inside helmets. A man could be nodding off behind sandbags one minute and snapping awake with a rifle in his hands the next, body swinging wildly between the drug's grip and the demands of war. It wasn't just grunts either. Cooks, clerks, drivers, even some officers used. The line between addict and soldier blurred until entire units felt like they were sleepwalking through the jungle, chasing a high more than an enemy. Some estimates said a quarter of all US troops tried heroin at some point. Others claimed half. The numbers hardly mattered. The evidence was in the glassy eyes, the slow steps, the endless demand for another bag. Heroin didn't just dull fear. It killed it. That was the appeal. Men who couldn't stand another day of listening for mines, who couldn't handle another sleepless night waiting for mortars, found peace in the needle. They didn't just feel calmer. They felt nothing at all. Out here, nothing felt like heaven, but nothingness had a cost. Nods during patrol meant missed signals. Addiction meant men willing to trade anything, ammo, boots, even rations, for their next bag. Some stole from their own squads, ripping through packs in the night. Fights broke out, trust cracked, and the war inside the unit sometimes grew as dangerous as the war outside. Heroin didn't just weaken bodies, it weakened bonds. The officers eventually caught on, but by then it was too late. Punishment couldn't keep up with the scale. Testing was unreliable. Discipline meaningless when half the camp was using. Some commanders turned a blind eye, hoping men high on heroin would at least stay calm and manageable. Others cracked down hard, dragging addicts through withdrawals that left them shaking and screaming, barely able to hold a rifle. Neither approach solved the problem. The bags kept coming. By the end of a tour, some men weren't thinking about survival anymore. They were thinking about supply. How to keep the high going once they got on the Freedom Bird back home. For many, the war didn't end when they stepped off the plane in the States. The bags followed them, or rather, the craving did. Thousands returned, not just broken by combat, but shackled to an addiction that had started in the jungles. Nurtured by plastic bags sold for pocket change. Heroin was more than a drug in Vietnam. It was a shadow war, one fought inside the minds and bodies of the soldiers. It didn't leave scars you could see, not immediately, but it hollowed men out, left them walking shells. Some made it through, quitting cold turkey or weaning off when the supply dried up. Others never did. They carried the habit home, into the streets, into their families, into the rest of their lives. The plastic bags were everywhere, crinkling quietly in pockets, traded like currency, tucked into hands shaking with need. They weren't glamorous, they weren't rare, they were ordinary, almost mundane. But inside those little bags was a force more powerful than bullets, more lasting than battles. For many, heroin defined the war as much as helicopters, or rice paddies, or jungle patrols. The smoke from cigarettes might have filled the mornings. The whiskey might have blurred the nights. But heroin swallowed the in-between. It turned days into fog, nights into nothing, men into ghosts who walked and fought and bled, but weren't really there anymore. And in the end, for those who couldn't let it go, the war didn't stay in Vietnam. It followed them home, in veins still hungry for the burn of a needle, in minds still chasing the numbness of those cheap little plastic bags. If heroin was the shadow that crept in and swallowed men whole, the pills were the steady background hum that never left. They didn't come in shady little plastic bags sold by kids outside the base. They came in bottles stamped with official seals, handed out by medics, shipped in boxes with the rest of the supplies. Pills for nerves, pills for pain, pills for everything. Out here, medicine and addiction blurred into one long swallow, and the line between what the army issued and what the black market offered barely mattered. The mornings often started with pills. Before breakfast, before the first cigarette, before coffee so strong it tasted like motor oil, you choked down a chalky white tablet meant to fight malaria. The pills were supposed to save you from fever, chills and death, but the side effects were their own punishment. Some made men nauseous, others gave them vivid, hallucinatory dreams, nights filled with strange visions that felt more real than the war itself. But you still took them, because malaria could lay you out for weeks or kill you outright. The pill was bitter. The taste stuck on your tongue, but you swallowed anyway. Painkillers followed close behind. Patrolling in the jungle tore men apart, not just with bullets or shrapnel, but with sprains, infections, broken bones, cuts that wouldn't heal. Medics carried bottles of pain pills, small white capsules that dulled the edge enough to keep you moving. Out here, pain wasn't a reason to stop. Pain was part of the uniform. You walked through it, and if a pill helped, you took it without asking questions. Some men took them when they weren't injured at all, just to keep the aches from settling in too deep, just to feel like their bodies weren't falling apart under the weight of mud and gear. Then there were the pills for sleep, or rather, for the lack of it. Nights in Vietnam weren't restful. Fear kept eyes open, insects buzzed in your ears, mortars could drop out of the sky at any time. Sleep was shallow, broken, unsatisfying. Doctors and medics handed out little capsules to help men drift off. They worked most of the time, but they also left you groggy, slow to react, your body heavy when you needed it sharp. Some men loved them, finally able to drift into unconsciousness without listening for every twig snap. Others hated the way they dulled them, made waking up feel like surfacing from underwater. But they still took them, because exhaustion was its own kind of death. The stimulants were another story. The army didn't like to advertise it, but speed made its rounds too. Amphetamines were passed out in neat little doses, meant to keep men awake on long patrols, to keep drivers from falling asleep at the wheel, to push soldiers through missions that demanded more energy than human bodies naturally had. Pop a pill, and suddenly your fatigue didn't matter. Your eyes stayed open, your steps quickened, your heart raced, but the crash was brutal. Jitters turned to shakes, nerves frayed into paranoia, and when the effect wore off, the exhaustion came back double. Some men used them to stay sharp. Others abused them just to feel invincible for a few hours. Either way, they became another part of the chemical landscape of the war. The black market picked up where the medics left off. Anything that came in a pill bottle was stolen, traded, sold. Valium, barbiturates, uppers, downers. If it could be swallowed, someone had it. Soldiers carried bottles in their packs, rattling with every step, little collections of escape in capsule form. One pill to calm the nerves, one pill to stop the headache, one pill to lift the mood, one pill to knock you out. The pharmacy wasn't down the street, it was in your pocket, and the pills weren't subtle. You could see it in the men who took them. The glassy stares, the jittery hands, the sudden bursts of energy followed by long stretches of silence. A guy might be buzzing with nervous laughter 1 minute, then passed out cold in the dirt the next. Conversations trailed off into nothing as jaws slackened or sped up into manic rambling when the wrong pill hit too hard. Pills smoothed the edges for some, but they turned others into shadows of themselves, bodies moving, rifles carried, but minds drifting elsewhere. Some soldiers mixed them, a pain pill with a beer, a sleeping pill with a joint. A handful of whatever was left in the bottom of the bottle washed down with warm water that tasted like metal. Nobody thought about interactions, about dosages, about consequences. Out here, tomorrow was never promised, so worrying about what a pill might do to you a year down the road seemed laughable. If it helped you survive today, you swallowed it. The officers pretended to regulate it, but even they dipped into the supply when the night stretched too long or the stress piled too high. The system itself blurred the line. Medics wanted their men functional, so they handed out pills freely, sometimes too freely. A backache got a painkiller. A bad dream got a sedative. Exhaustion got a stimulant. Problems were solved with bottles, lids popped off, and a handful of tablets shoved into dirty palms. It was quicker than talking, easier than dealing with the real issue, and it kept the machine moving. Addiction crept in quietly. Unlike heroin, it didn't look obvious at first. A man wasn't nodding off mid-sentence or stumbling through patrols. But soon he couldn't get through a morning without his pills. The rattle of a bottle became as important as the rattle of ammo in his pouches. He wasn't taking them because he needed them anymore. He was taking them because he couldn't not take them. His body demanded it, his mind depended on it, and the thought of going without made his skin crawl. The war itself seemed designed to push pills into hands. Fear, pain, exhaustion, boredom, every one of them had a chemical solution. And men took those solutions because what else could they do? Talk about their feelings? Ask for leave? Admit they couldn't handle it? None of that was an option. You swallowed, you chewed, you washed it down, and you marched on. The pill culture shaped the rhythm of life as much as the helicopters or the rations. Men counted their days in bottles emptied, in doses swallowed, in the way their moods shifted with the drugs. A joint might soften the evening, a swig of whiskey might numb the edges, but the pills filled in every other gap. Morning to night, wakefulness to sleep, pain to calm, they were the invisible scaffolding holding soldiers upright. And just like the other substances, the pills didn't stay in Vietnam. They came home in duffel bags, in habits too strong to break, in cravings that gnawed long after the uniforms were hung up for good. Doctors back home prescribed more. Veterans demanded refills. And the cycle kept spinning. The war ended on paper, but for many, the chemical war inside their own bodies never did. Out here, though, nobody thought about the future. Pills were for now, for this patrol, this night, this pain, this fear. The bottles rattled, the capsules slid down throats, and the war ground on, fueled not just by rifles and rations, but by endless little tablets that promised relief and delivered dependence. The thing about all those bottles and bags and joints was that everyone knew. Nobody could miss it. The smell of marijuana drifted through the tents like another layer of smoke. Cigarettes burned constantly. Whiskey sloshed in canteens. Pills rattled in pockets, and heroin. Well, heroin left men nodding off in plain sight. It wasn't subtle. You didn't have to be clever to notice. But here's the truth. A lot of the commanders just let it happen. Some of them ignored it outright, eyes sliding past a circle of men, passing a joint, pretending the haze wasn't there. Others grumbled about it, wrote reports, maybe made a speech about discipline and honour, then went back to their own tents where bottles sat tucked under cots. The war wasn't tidy, it wasn't orderly, and the officers knew that if they cracked down too hard, they'd break men who were already hanging by a thread. At first, they tried, when the problem was small, when it was just a few guys smoking in the back of camp. Some commanders made an example out of them. Punishments, extra duty, demotions. The idea was to scare the rest into staying clean. But it didn't work. The war was too long, too grinding, too miserable. If one man was punished, two more lit up the next night. And after a while, the officers saw the truth. The war wasn't going to be won by chasing after every joint and every pill. They had bigger problems to deal with. So they looked the other way. They told themselves it was about priorities. What mattered more? A squad being fully alert during a routine patrol, or that same squad completely falling apart because the men couldn't handle another sleepless night? If a little smoke kept them calm, maybe it was better than nothing. If a pill kept a soldier from shaking too hard to aim his rifle, maybe it wasn't such a bad thing. In a twisted way, the drugs were part of keeping the machine running. And make no mistake, it was about the machine. The commanders were there to keep bodies moving through the jungle, to fill patrol rosters, to have enough rifles lined up at the perimeter. They weren't there to babysit every man's habits. As long as soldiers showed up when they were supposed to, held their positions, and didn't collapse mid-mission, the higher-ups could convince themselves it wasn't their problem. The hypocrisy was thick. Everyone heard the speeches about discipline, about the honour of the uniform, about staying sharp in the face of the enemy. Then those same voices would vanish into private quarters, where officers drank imported scotch or lit cigarettes rolled from the same green leaves they claimed to forbid. Rules bent fast in the heat of Vietnam, and the men in charge bent them right alongside their subordinates. Some commanders didn't just look away, they quietly encouraged it. Not openly, not in orders or memos, but in the way they smiled when their unit seemed calmer after a long day. A camp buzzing with restless, angry soldiers was a problem. A camp half asleep in a haze of marijuana was manageable. Booze, weed, pills. They softened the edges, kept tempers low, smoothed over the constant friction. Officers noticed, and though they'd never admit it, they preferred a unit half high to a unit ready to explode. Heroin complicated things. It wasn't just calming, it was destructive. Men slumped over rifles, forgot orders, wandered through the day like ghosts. That couldn't be ignored forever. And yet, by the early 70s, the problem was so widespread that even heroin slipped into the unsolvable column. Whole squads were compromised, whole companies dotted with addicts. What could a commander do? Arrest half his men? Ground the entire unit? Replace them with who? Instead they drew invisible lines. A joint after patrol? Fine, as long as you show up tomorrow. Pills to sleep? Fine, as long as you're on your feet when the sun comes up. A beer or two before bed? Nobody cares. Heroin? Officially forbidden, but unofficially tolerated until it interfered with combat. The rules weren't written down, but everyone understood them. The officers would look the other way, right up until the drugs got in the way of their reports. That's when they acted, not out of morality, but out of necessity. The army started drug testing eventually, but even that was more theatre than solution. Men found ways around it, swapping samples, timing their usage, or just hoping nobody followed up. Commanders checked the boxes, filed the paperwork, and went back to their real jobs. The drug problem wasn't solved, it was managed, barely, and the men noticed. They knew the officers weren't blind. They joked about it, sometimes bitterly, sometimes with relief. As long as you can walk, they don't care what's in your veins. It wasn't far from the truth. A functioning addict was still a body in a uniform, still one more rifle in the line. That was what mattered. The truth is, most commanders were caught in the same trap as their men. They were in a war nobody seemed to understand, one that stretched on without clear victory, one that wore everyone down from top to bottom. They needed men to fight, but they also needed men not to snap. If drugs filled that gap, if they kept the numbers up, if they kept the machine grinding forward for another month, then maybe that was good enough. Looking the other way wasn't just laziness, it was survival. For the soldiers, for the officers, for the entire system. Pretend not to see, pretend not to hear. Pretend the haze drifting out of the tents is just cigarette smoke. Focus on the numbers, on the patrols completed, on the bodies shipped home. The rest? That was somebody else's problem. Years later, when the war was over and people wanted explanations, some commanders admitted what everyone already knew. They had seen the drugs, they had smelled them, counted them, even confiscated them. But they hadn't stopped them, couldn't stop them, maybe didn't really want to, because in the middle of that endless jungle, with the war dragging on, discipline wasn't about clean lungs or clear veins. Discipline was about keeping the machine running however you could. And so the haze thickened, the bottles emptied, the pills rattled in pockets, and the commanders kept their eyes on the horizon. Not because they didn't see, but because they chose not to. The war was enough. The rest would take care of itself. Or not. Either way, it wasn't their problem anymore. Not every soldier lit up, drank down, or nodded off in Vietnam. Some said no. Maybe it was because of faith, or fear, or the memory of someone back home who they couldn't bear to disappoint. Maybe it was stubbornness, pride, or just the belief that the only way to survive a war was with a clear head. Whatever the reason, there were men who looked at the haze of marijuana drifting across camp, the bottles hidden in canteens, the pills rattling in pockets, and said, "Not me." And in Vietnam, that choice came with a cost. At first, the men who said no were respected, at least in theory. Clean living sounded good on paper. Officers liked the idea of men who didn't drink themselves stupid, who didn't stumble through patrols half high, who could keep their eyes open without popping pills. These were the guys who looked sharp, who followed the rules, who seemed like they could be counted on. But war doesn't run on theory, and in practice, refusing what everyone else accepted made you different. And different wasn't safe. Camaraderie in Vietnam wasn't built on uniforms or salutes. It was built on the little rituals that kept men from going insane. Passing a joint, sharing a bottle, splitting pills like candy. These things tied the squads together as much as foxholes or firefights. If you sat out, if you refused, you were on the edge of the circle. You weren't part of the laughter, the hazy conversations, the half-forgotten songs sung in smoky tents. You weren't in the tribe. The pressure to join in was constant. Someone would shove a joint into your hand and say, "Don't be a stiff." A bottle would be passed your way, and eyes would narrow if you pushed it back. Refusing wasn't just about you. It felt like you were judging everyone else, even if you weren't, and nobody wanted a reminder that maybe what they were doing wasn't harmless. Better to call you uptight, better to freeze you out, than to face their own reflection. Some men tried to ride the middle ground. They laughed with the others sat in the circles, pretended to take a puff before passing the joint along. They raised the canteen to their lips without swallowing, shook a pill into their hand and palmed it instead of eating it. It worked for a while, but not always. People noticed. Soldiers living on the edge of death developed sharp eyes. They saw when you didn't inhale, when you didn't drink, when you stayed clear while everyone else faded. And once they noticed, the divide deepened. Isolation set in quickly. A sober soldier in a stone squad was an outsider, trusted less, invited less, seen less as a brother, and more as a stranger wearing the same uniform. And in Vietnam, isolation was dangerous. Trust was survival. You needed to know the man next to you would cover your back without hesitation. If they thought you weren't one of them, the hesitation crept in. Not always, not everywhere, but enough that men felt it in their bones. Some paid in words, the constant ribbing, the mockery, the whispers behind their backs. Boy Scout, straight edge, holy roller. Small things, but they added up. Out here, where belonging was the only shield against despair, being singled out felt like punishment. But others paid in heavier ways. The line between teasing and hostility blurred fast in the heat, the boredom, the haze of intoxication. Sometimes resentment boiled over. A man who refused was accused of being a snitch, even when he wasn't. Suspicion grew, distrust spread, and in a war already thick with paranoia, suspicion could turn deadly. Fragging wasn't just a word in Vietnam, it was a reality. Officers too strict, men too different, anyone who threatened the fragile balance, they could become targets. A grenade rolled under a cot, a rifle accidentally misfired, a mine accidentally triggered. Most men who said no didn't pay that price, but the fear of it hung over them all the same. Being sober in a place where everyone else was numbing themselves was more than lonely. It was dangerous. Then there was the internal cost. Saying no meant facing everything raw. The fear, the exhaustion, the endless noise, the constant heat. No haze to soften it. No numbness to make it tolerable. No chemical curtain to hide behind. Every patrol was sharper. Every sound louder. Every death more vivid. For some men, that was a point of pride. They told themselves they were stronger for it, tougher, truer. For others, it was torment. They carried the weight that others managed to drop for a few hours, and it crushed them quietly, invisibly. Letters home reflected the divide. The men who smoked or drank filled their pages with jokes, with rambling stories, with half-coherent thoughts scribbled in shaky handwriting. The sober men wrote cleaner, clearer letters, but they were often darker. The reality pressed harder on them, and the words spilled heavier onto the page. Families back home might not have known why, but they felt it. The war carved deeper into the men who faced it without the chemical shield. And yet, some men managed it. They stayed sober, stayed clear, stayed alive. They endured the sideways looks, the whispered names, the sense of being separate. They carried the full weight of the war and somehow walked out of the jungle still standing. For them, the price was high, but the return was a body not riddled with addiction, a mind not haunted by withdrawal, a chance to come home without another enemy living under their skin. But even that wasn't guaranteed. Some of the sober men came home envied by their families, praised by their commanders, but still broken inside. The war had chewed them raw, and with no numbing, every bite had gone deep. They carried scars invisible but sharp, cuts that might have been dulled if they had joined the haze. For some, saying no didn't save them. It just meant their destruction was cleaner, sharper, easier to hide. In Vietnam, there wasn't really a winning choice. Say yes, and you risk losing yourself to bottles, to pills, to powder. Say no, and you risk losing the fragile trust of the men around you, carrying the weight alone until it bent your back and broke your mind. Survival wasn't just about dodging bullets or avoiding mines. It was about navigating the grey space between belonging and destruction, between escape and endurance. The soldiers who said no weren't heroes in the moment. They weren't celebrated, weren't respected the way they might have been back home. They were outsiders, tolerated at best, resented at worst. And when they paid for it, they paid quietly, in loneliness, in suspicion, in the sharp edges of a war faced without softening. They carried the weight so the others didn't have to see it. And when the haze thickened, and the bottles emptied and the joints burned down, those men stood apart, clear-eyed, carrying the war in full, and paying for it every single day. The haze didn't stay in camp. It didn't end when the bottles were emptied or the joints burned down to the filter. It followed the soldiers out into the jungle, into the rice paddies, into the black nights where every sound might be a trap. Drug use in Vietnam wasn't just about passing time. It seeped into the missions themselves, into patrols and night watches where altered men carried rifles, scanned tree lines, and tried to walk the line between survival and oblivion. A patrol in Vietnam was already a gamble. The heat beat down, the mud sucked at your boots, the trees pressed in from every side, and the fear chewed at your insides with every step. Add a layer of alcohol or pills or smoke, and the whole thing shifted. For some men, the high made them feel invincible, like bullets couldn't touch them, like the jungle was just another backdrop. For others, it dulled their senses, slowed their reflexes, blurred the sharp edges of survival until mistakes crept in like ghosts. You could smell it sometimes, even on the move. A faint sweetness drifting from the line, the unmistakable scent of marijuana mixing with sweat and insect repellent. A glance at the man beside you showed glassy eyes, a half smile tugging at his lips as he gripped his rifle loosely. He was walking through the same jungle as you, but in his head he might have been miles away. Another man staggered slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the whiskey hidden in his canteen. The steps weren't sharp, the focus wasn't steady, but he insisted he was fine. Insisted the booze made him calmer, steadier, less afraid. Commanders gave orders, but orders didn't always sink in the way they were supposed to. A squad high on marijuana might whisper and laugh more than they should, voices carrying further into the trees than anyone realised. A soldier hopped up on speed might rush ahead, too eager, too wired, ignoring signals to slow down. A man numbed by heroin might drag his feet, lagging behind, eyes drooping even as danger pressed in closer. Patrolling with men in altered states was like marching with ghosts and firecrackers all at once. You never knew which way it would go. Night watch was worse. Sitting in the dark, rifle across your lap, the jungle pressing in silent and heavy. It was supposed to be a time of focus. But focus was hard when your veins buzzed with pills, or your lungs still held the warmth of smoke. Some men said it helped. Marijuana took the edge off the fear, kept them from panicking at every rustle in the brush. Pills steadied hands that shook too much otherwise. Booze made the long hours blur, made the silence feel less crushing. They swore it made them better at their jobs. But the truth was, it was a coin toss. Sometimes the altered state meant a calmer watch. Sometimes it meant nodding off with your head against the stock of your rifle, the perimeter unguarded while you drifted into half sleep. Stories spread quickly. A man too drunk to react when shadows moved in the tree line. A soldier too high to tell the difference between fireflies and the glint of an enemy rifle. A squad that laughed too loudly during an ambush and drew fire down on themselves. The jungle didn't forgive mistakes, and drugs made mistakes more likely. But still, the bottles and bags followed, because the alternative, facing the jungle stone cold, sober, raw, nerves exposed, felt worse. The paradox was cruel. Drugs dulled fear, but they also dulled survival. A calmer soldier might not shoot at shadows, but he might also miss the enemy crawling closer. A wired soldier might march harder, but he might also burn out too fast, crash when energy was most needed. A stoned soldier might feel more in tune with the jungle, but that connection vanished when the haze turned into paranoia, and every shadow became an enemy. Out here, the line between relief and disaster was razor thin, and men stumbled across it daily. Night watches blurred into strange scenes. The glow of cigarettes and joints floating in the dark. Faint orange dots scattered along the perimeter like ghostly lanterns. Quiet laughter drifting through the trees when silence was supposed to rule. Whispered conversations that spiraled into nonsense. Men talking to themselves, to each other, to no one at all. And then sudden silences. Heads slumping forward, rifles slipping slightly, eyes closing for just a second too long. The enemy could have walked right in sometimes, and nobody would have noticed until it was too late. But the drugs weren't just weakness. Sometimes they saved men from snapping. A soldier on night watch, sober, might sit trembling, finger too tight on the trigger, heart hammering in his throat until he fired at nothing just to release the pressure. A soldier with a little haze in his lungs might sit calmer, his nerves dulled just enough to keep him steady. The line between disaster and survival blurred again. Some units swore their nights were quieter when the men smoked before watch. Fewer accidental shots. Fewer panicked calls. The drugs might dull danger, but they also dulled panic. The trade-off was real, and nobody had the answer. Day patrols carried their own risks. Imagine walking through thick jungle, vines grabbing at your legs, mosquitoes swarming your face, sweat pouring down your back, and your squad mates swaying slightly, humming songs under their breath, laughing at nothing. Rifles dangled loosely. Boots stumbled in the mud, and commands repeated 3 times before they sank in. Discipline frayed, formation broke, and the jungle seemed to lean closer, ready to swallow the squad whole. And yet, sometimes those same squads came back alive. The men claiming the haze kept them loose, kept them from snapping under the strain. The commanders who saw it didn't always intervene. They knew, they smelled it. They watched their men march out glassy-eyed and come back slower, hazier, less sharp. But what could they do? Punish half the squad? Replace them with who? They needed bodies in the field, and bodies fueled by drugs were still bodies in uniform. So they muttered, filed reports, maybe yelled a little, but the patrols went out again the next day, haze and all. It wasn't every unit, not every squad. Some stayed sharper, stricter, cleaner. But enough fell into the rhythm that it became part of the landscape. Drugs weren't just in the camps, they were in the patrols, in the foxholes, in the night watches. They were in the jungle itself, carried in every pack, smoked in every clearing, swallowed before every march. The war wasn't fought sober, not completely. It was fought through haze, through blurred edges, through bodies half numb and half alert. And when mistakes happened, when a shot went wild, when a soldier fell asleep on watch, when an ambush was botched because laughter gave it away, the blame was scattered. Sometimes it landed on the drugs. Sometimes it landed on the heat, the exhaustion, the sheer weight of the war itself. Everyone knew the truth. It was all tangled together. The jungle, the fear, the boredom, the substances. They were inseparable. One fed the other until the whole thing was a loop that couldn't be broken. For the men on those drug-fueled patrols, the memory stayed strange. Some remembered the haze fondly, the moments of laughter in the mud, the way the war seemed softer when the smoke curled into their lungs. Others remembered the mistakes, the fear of walking beside someone too high to react, the weight of knowing your life depended on a man whose hands were trembling from withdrawal or booze. The war pressed hard enough. Adding drugs into the patrols made it heavier, stranger, more unpredictable. But in Vietnam, unpredictability was already the rule. The drugs just made it obvious. And so the jungle swallowed more patrols. The nights blurred under smoke, and the rifles leaned in glassy hands. The war kept grinding, fueled not just by bullets and orders, but by bottles, pills, powders, and smoke drifting into the darkness where men kept watch with heavy eyes and slow reflexes. Out there, survival wasn't just about fighting the enemy. It was about fighting the haze that hung over the men standing guard, rifles in their laps, minds drifting somewhere far from the perimeter they were supposed to protect. The drugs didn't just change the way men saw the jungle, they changed the way they saw each other. And in Vietnam, where nerves were already stretched thin, where trust was the only real armour against the chaos, that shift was deadly. Fragging. That was the word whispered in camps, muttered in the dark, never spoken too loud but always understood. Soldiers killing their own. Not the enemy. Not the Viet Cong. Their own officers, their own NCOs. Sometimes in anger, sometimes in fear, sometimes just because the paranoia grew too thick to ignore. It didn't start with drugs, but drugs poured gasoline on the fire. Fear and resentment were already woven deep into the fabric of the war. Officers made bad calls, ordered dangerous patrols, pushed men too hard. The grunts bore the weight, marched the miles, bled in the mud. When anger built up with no release, it festered. A grenade rolled under a cot wasn't just an accident. It was the release of that pressure. But add booze, add pills, add heroin, and the paranoia spread like rot. A drunk soldier stewing in anger thought less about consequences. A stoned soldier convinced himself whispers were plots. A man high on heroin saw enemies everywhere, even in the bunks around him. And once the line between friend and foe blurred in your head, fragging stopped being unthinkable. The act itself was simple, brutal. A grenade slipped into a tent, the pin pulled, the explosion tearing through canvas and flesh. Sometimes it was a shot in the dark, a trigger squeezed from the shadows. Sometimes it was a mine set in the path of a jeep. The methods varied, but the message was always the same. This officer, this sergeant, this man isn't trusted, isn't wanted, isn't safe among his own. And the rest of the unit looked away, silent, complicit, because fear worked both ways. If it happened to him, it could happen to anyone. Paranoia grew thicker than the jungle. Officers slept light, never fully closing their eyes, glancing at the men around them with unease. They carried pistols even inside camp, not against the enemy outside the wire, but against the possibility of a grenade from their own bunkhouse. Orders were given more carefully, voices measured, punishment softened. Everyone knew the statistics. By the early 70s, fragging had become common enough that it couldn't be denied. Hundreds of incidents, hundreds more suspected, and countless whispers that never reached official reports. Drugs didn't cause all of it, but they fueled the mistrust. A soldier high on weed might laugh 1 minute and turn suspicious the next, convinced his sergeant was setting him up. A man deep in heroin's fog might misread every word, every glance, every silence, twisting it into betrayal. Pills sharpened some men, dulled others, left them jittery and unstable. In a place already ripe with tension, chemicals tipped the balance from anger to violence. And the paranoia wasn't one-sided. Officers looked at their men with the same suspicion. Walking into a tent smelled like stepping into a haze of marijuana. Bottles rattled in packs. Eyes darted. Conversations cut short when rank walked in. Trust bled out quickly. How do you lead men you know are half altered, half drifting somewhere else in their minds? How do you sleep when you know some of them resent you enough to roll a grenade under your cot? The officers knew they were vulnerable. The men knew it too. And that knowledge hung in the air like smoke. Fragging wasn't random. It was targeted. The strict officers, the ones who pushed too hard, the ones who handed out punishments while ignoring the haze that kept their men from breaking, they were the ones most at risk. Some were killed for incompetence, some for arrogance, some simply because they didn't belong in the fragile rhythm the unit had built for itself. Fragging was control, a brutal kind of democracy in the mud. But paranoia made it unpredictable. A drunken argument, a high-fueled misunderstanding, a rumour whispered too many times. Suddenly a man was gone, and the explanation was thin. Maybe it was the enemy. Maybe it was an accident. Or maybe it was one of their own, settling a score in the only way the war seemed to allow. Out here, truth blurred with rumour, and the line between combat casualty and fragging victim was paper thin. For the sober men, the ones who refused, the paranoia cut deepest. They already stood apart, already marked as different. It didn't take much for others to label them as threats, as snitches, as men who couldn't be trusted to keep silent. Fragging didn't always need a reason. Sometimes suspicion was enough. A sober man in a haze-filled squad stood out like a flare in the dark, and flares drew fire. The fear of fragging shaped behaviour as much as the fear of ambushes. Orders were softened, discipline loosened, authority diluted. Officers who might have cracked down back home learned to tread carefully, to negotiate with their men rather than command them. Authority bent under the weight of paranoia, and discipline fractured further. Drugs didn't just dull soldiers, they dulled the chain of command itself. At night, the paranoia thickened. Shadows seemed heavier, silences longer. A man rolled over in his cot, hand brushing his rifle, and eyes opened across the tent, watching, suspicious. The pop of a cigarette lighter could be mistaken for the click of a grenade pin. A muttered word in the dark could spiral into panic. Fear pressed down from the jungle outside, but inside the wire it pressed just as hard. The enemy wasn't always out there. Sometimes he was in the next bunk. Years later, men spoke of fragging with unease. Some admitted they knew it happened in their units, that everyone knew, but nobody said a word. Others denied it flat, unwilling to believe their own could turn like that. But the records, the reports, the scars told the truth. Fragging was real, and the paranoia it bred spread through every layer of the war. The war stripped trust from men piece by piece. Drugs stripped more. Together, they left squads brittle, commanders cautious, and the entire structure of discipline warped. Fragging wasn't the main story of Vietnam, but it was a shadow that hung over everything. A grenade in the dark, a body in a cot, a silence in the ranks after the blast. Everyone pretending not to know. Everyone knowing exactly what had happened. And the paranoia never left. Men carried it home, the twitch in their eyes, the mistrust in their voices, the sense that someone behind them might be the real threat. In Vietnam, drugs blurred the edges of reality, but paranoia sharpened one truth. Survival wasn't just about fighting the enemy, it was about surviving your own. Rest and recuperation. The words sounded like a promise. They were printed neatly in orders, said with straight faces by officers, whispered like salvation by men staring into the green wall of the jungle. R&R. 2 little letters that meant escape, however brief, from the mud, the insects, the endless fear. Saigon, Bangkok, Taipei, Honolulu. Places that felt more like dreams than destinations. A few days out of hell. A taste of something close to normal. At least that was the myth. In reality, R&R was just another extension of the war. A different battlefield dressed up in neon lights and hotel beds. The plane out was the sweetest moment. Boots off the ground, the jungle shrinking below, the thump of rotors replaced by the hum of jet engines. Men leaned back in their seats, eyes half closed, grinning as though the worst was behind them. For a few hours it almost felt true. Landing in Saigon or Bangkok, the contrast was overwhelming. Bright lights, bustling streets, the smell of food that wasn't canned or powdered. Music spilled out of bars. Vendors shouted in the markets. Neon signs flickered above crowded alleys. It was stimulation on every level after weeks of monotony. For men who hadn't seen civilization in months, it was dizzying, intoxicating before a single drink was poured. And that was the hook. R&R wasn't about rest. It wasn't about recuperation. It was about blowing off pressure before men cracked completely. Soldiers stumbled off planes and straight into bars, clubs and brothels, wallets thick with back pay and pockets burning to be emptied. Booze flowed like water. Bottles clinked on every table. Glasses refill before they were half empty. Drunken laughter spilled into the streets, mixing with the drone of motorbikes and the chatter of languages soldiers barely understood. Drugs weren't far behind. In Saigon, marijuana was sold openly, pipes passed from hand to hand in back rooms thick with smoke. In Bangkok, heroin was cheaper and purer than anything in the field. Little glass vials and paper packets offered in whispers that didn't stay secret for long. Men who had dabbled in camp found themselves diving deep in the cities, chasing highs that blurred entire days into oblivion. What was supposed to be rest turned into binges that left bodies shaking, and minds more shattered than before. Prostitution was everywhere. Women lined the streets, called from doorways, leaned out of windows, promising comfort for a price. Soldiers who hadn't touched anyone but their own squad mates in months poured into the brothels, chasing something like intimacy, something like connection, though everyone knew it wasn't real. The transactions were quick, mechanical, wrapped in the smell of perfume and sweat, and when they were over, the emptiness felt heavier than before. But still the men returned, night after night, because emptiness was better than nothing. Hotels filled with soldiers passed out across beds, half-dressed, bottles on the floor, ashtrays overflowing. The same men who looked sharp in fatigues looked broken under neon lights, eyes glazed, laughter too loud, arguments too sharp. Fights broke out in alleys, in bars, in hotel lobbies. Knives flashed, bottles shattered, blood spilled on tiled floors. Shore patrols dragged men off the streets, stuffed them back into rooms, trying to keep a lid on chaos that was already boiling over. Letters Home spoke of R&R as if it were paradise. Men wrote about clean sheets, hot showers, food that didn't taste like rust. They didn't mention the drunken brawls, the cheap highs, the hollow encounters. Mothers and fathers imagined their sons resting peacefully in hotel beds, recharging before heading back into the fight. The truth was far grimmer. R&R didn't heal. It numbed, it distracted. It gave the illusion of escape before snapping men back into the same mud and blood. And that return was the cruelest part. The flight back into Vietnam was heavy with silence. Men leaned against windows, heads pounding, stomachs sour, skin crawling with withdrawal. The bright lights of Saigon and Bangkok faded into memory before the wheels even touched down. The jungle swallowed them again, sweat poured down again, rifles weighed heavy again. Whatever relief R&R had given was gone in hours, replaced by exhaustion and regret. Some men didn't make it back. A few overdosed in hotel rooms, bodies carried quietly away. Others disappeared into the cities, lost in alleys, swallowed by black markets and backroom deals. Officially, they were missing. Unofficially, everyone knew they weren't coming back. The war took men in the jungle, but it also took them in Saigon, in Bangkok, in the places meant to save them. For those who did return, the myth cracked wide open. R&R wasn't salvation. It was another battlefield, fought with bottles and powders instead of bullets. It was a pressure valve, twisted open just enough to release steam, never enough to stop the system from boiling. Men went back to the field, not rested, not recuperated, but more hollow, more addicted, more fractured than before. And still the cycle repeated. Because what else could the army do? Without R&R, men would snap in the mud. With it, they snapped under neon. There was no winning, only postponing the collapse. Years later, veterans spoke of R&R with bitter laughs. They remembered the streets, the lights, the endless bottles, the faces of women they never saw again. Some spoke fondly, others with shame, most with resignation. It hadn't been rest. It hadn't been recuperation. It had been another mask, another lie, another piece of the war that wore them down in different colours. The myth of R&R was that it gave relief. The truth was that it only deepened the wounds. The jungle never let anyone stay high forever. No matter what you smoked, swallowed, or shot into your veins, the crash always came. And when it came hard. The jungle was merciless that way. It waited, patient, until the laughter died down, until the bottle was empty, until the haze slipped away. Then it pressed in again, louder, hotter, heavier than before. Coming down in Vietnam wasn't just about headaches or dry mouths. It was about being slammed back into reality with no cushion. The sound of helicopters thumping overhead, the distant crack of rifles, the sting of mosquitoes, the sweat pouring into your eyes. All of it felt sharper, meaner, harder to endure after a night of chasing escape. The war didn't care if you were hungover, strung out, or shaking from withdrawal. It was still there, waiting. Hangovers in the jungle weren't like hangovers back home. There was no quiet bedroom, no cool glass of water, no greasy breakfast to ease you through it. There was mud, sweat, and orders barked before the sun was even fully up. You rolled out of your cot with your skull pounding like artillery fire, your stomach twisting at the smell of rations, your mouth dry as dust. You swallowed iodine-flavoured water from your canteen and gagged, wishing for anything cold, anything clean. But all you had was warm metal-tasting liquid and another long patrol ahead. Withdrawal was worse. A man used to pills or heroin didn't just wake up tired. He woke up shaking, skin crawling, body screaming for the thing it had been fed the night before. Sweat poured even when the air was still, muscles cramped, bones ached like they'd been broken. Eyes darted, hands trembled, voices cracked. The jungle blurred and twisted around them, and every step felt like dragging chains through the mud. The enemy wasn't the Viet Cong. The enemy was inside their own skin. The comedown wasn't just physical. It was mental. Men who smoked or shot themselves numb woke up to memories they'd tried to bury. Faces of friends torn apart in firefights. The sound of screams echoing through the trees. the sight of body bags lined up like luggage waiting for a plane. The haze covered it for a night, but when it lifted, the images came back sharper, clearer, crueler. And in the jungle there was no therapist, no quiet room, no one to say the nightmares weren't real. Out here, the nightmares were just another part of the landscape. Some men came down angry. The fog lifted, the pain roared back in, and they lashed out at anyone nearby. Fists flew over nothing, curses filled the air, friendships cracked under the strain. Others came down silent, withdrawing into themselves, eyes hollow, voices gone. They marched like shadows, rifles hanging limp, present in body but absent in mind. The crash stripped away whatever thin layer of escape they had managed, leaving them raw and brittle. And the jungle punished weakness. A hungover soldier stumbled in the mud, boots dragging. A man shaking from withdrawal lagged behind, making noise where silence was life or death. An exhausted, hollow-eyed soldier on watch missed the flicker of movement in the trees. The war didn't pause for comedowns. It took advantage. Mistakes meant blood, and blood meant more ghosts to haunt the next night's escape. Officers saw it. They yelled, threatened, tried to enforce discipline, but the pattern never broke. The highs kept coming, and so did the crashes. The jungle was full of men staggering through their days, half fighting two wars at once. The one outside the wire, and the one inside their own bodies. Neither war let up. Both demanded everything. The worst part was the cycle. A man came down hard, swore he wouldn't touch another pill, another bottle, another bag. He suffered through the shakes, the sweats, the pounding head, the twisting gut. And then, as soon as he could, he lit up, swallowed, or shot up again. Because the war wasn't stopping. The jungle wasn't getting easier. The fear wasn't going away. Coming down hurt. Staying down hurt more. There were no safety nets, no detox centres, no gentle weaning, just men crashing in mud, in tents, in foxholes, trying to hold rifles steady while their bodies betrayed them. Some held on, ground through the pain, kept moving. Others collapsed, curled in corners, whispered promises to themselves that they couldn't keep, and the rest watched, knowing they might be next, knowing the cycle was waiting for them too. The comedowns became part of the rhythm of the war. Patrol, escape, crash, night watch, haze, withdrawal. Letters home written shaky-handed, the words wobbling across paper as men tried to pretend they were fine. Jokes made in the daylight about the hangovers. Curses muttered in the dark about the shakes. The cycle was everywhere, unspoken but obvious. Years later, when veterans talked about Vietnam, they didn't just talk about firefights or ambushes. They talked about the crashes. The mornings when their heads split open under the sun. The nights when their bodies crawled with withdrawal. The way the jungle seemed to double its weight every time the haze wore off. The enemy outside was real, but so was the enemy inside, and the comedown was its sharpest weapon. The myth of escape was always temporary. Every high ended. Every bottle emptied. Every pill wore off. And the jungle waited, patient, unrelenting, ready to slam men back into the mud with twice the weight. Out here there was no such thing as staying gone. You always came down. And when you did, you came down hard. The orders came down. The tour was over, and for a few men it felt like relief. The Freedom Bird, that was what they called the plane that carried them out of Vietnam and back toward the world. Every man who stepped onto it carried something. Some carried scars. Some carried medals. Some carried only the hollow look of someone who had seen too much. But a staggering number carried something else entirely. They carried a habit. Flying home wasn't just about leaving the jungle behind. It was about realising the war had already carved itself into you, so deep you couldn't walk away clean. For the soldiers who smoked, drank, swallowed, or shot their way through 12 months of fear and boredom, the war didn't end on the tarmac. It came with them, folded into their veins, rattling in their pockets, stitched into their nerves. The body doesn't forget. Neither does the mind. Men boarded the plane with pockets full of plastic bags, bottles tucked into their gear, pills rattling inside socks rolled tight in duffels. Some didn't bother hiding it. Customs checks were sloppy. Officers too busy moving bodies to worry about what they carried. Others smuggled carefully, trading tricks, swapping stories about which airports looked the other way. Everyone knew the demand back home would be high, and the temptation to keep feeding the beast inside their chest would be even higher. The flight itself was a strange kind of purgatory. Men sat in rows, boots stretched into aisles, eyes closed but not sleeping. The smell of sweat and smoke still clung to their uniforms, mixed now with the sour tang of withdrawal. Some were already crashing, twitching in their seats, sweating under the recycled air of the plane. Their hands shook, their legs bounced, their eyes darted with a hunger that had nothing to do with the meal trays handed out by tired flight attendants. Others numbed themselves mid-air. Bottles appeared from bags, cans cracked open, joints lit in the cramped bathrooms. The plane was supposed to be a passage back to normal life. Instead, it was a floating extension of Vietnam, hazy, restless, tense. The war was below them, shrinking into distance, but the habit stayed strapped in the seat beside them. Landing back on American soil should have felt like salvation. Families waiting at airports, flags waving, cameras snapping. But for men who stepped off the plane with a habit, the moment was complicated. The hugs were real, the tears were real, but so was the gnawing need in their gut. Their bodies craved what had been cheap and easy in Vietnam. Now back home, the cravings didn't vanish. They sharpened. For some, the first stop wasn't a family dinner or a reunion. It was a back alley, a dealer, a needle. Heroin that had cost dollars in Saigon suddenly cost hundreds in New York or Chicago. The strength wasn't the same, the purity was cut, the bags smaller. But the need was bigger, and men who had once sworn they would leave the habit in the jungle found themselves chasing it through American streets, carrying the war into neighbourhoods that had no idea what they were inheriting. Others leaned on alcohol instead. The bar stools filled with veterans, their uniforms traded for civilian clothes, but their eyes still carrying the same hollow weight. They drank hard, drank fast, drank like they were still in Saigon, still in the barracks, still trying to drown the noise in their heads. Families watched, confused, alarmed, as men who had come home alive seemed determined to kill themselves one glass at a time. The pills followed too. Doctors handed out prescriptions easily in those years, bottles of tranquilizers, bottles of painkillers, bottles that rattled the same way they had in the field. Veterans lined up, described their symptoms in vague terms. Anxiety, pain, sleeplessness, and the pills flowed. The war didn't need to smuggle them anymore. The pharmacies at home took over. For some, the addiction stayed quiet. They hid it from wives, from parents, from children. They swallowed or injected in silence, keeping up the mask of normalcy while the war still pulsed through their bloodstream. For others, It broke out loud and violent. Arrests, overdoses, hospital visits, broken families. The newspapers wrote about crime waves, about drug epidemics, but rarely about the men who had learned their habits in the jungle, who had flown home with more than just duffels and scars. The cruel irony was how invisible it all became. The country wanted to move on, wanted to look away from the war. Veterans returned to jobs, to schools, to neighbourhoods that didn't want to hear about patrols, firefights, or heroin in plastic bags. They wanted silence. They wanted closure. But the men who had flown home with habits couldn't close anything. Their bodies refused to forget. Their veins screamed reminders daily. And so the war kept going, hidden in kitchens, bedrooms, back alleys, basements. Not everyone succumbed. Some men managed to break free, sweating through withdrawals in small apartments, white-knuckling through nights of nightmares and pain. Some leaned on churches, on families, on sheer stubbornness. Some walked away from the habit like they had walked out of the jungle, scarred but alive, but enough carried it with them that an entire generation of veterans became part of a story the country barely wanted to tell. The war didn't end when the plane touched down. It kept pulsing, quietly, through veins. Flying home with a habit wasn't just about drugs. It was about carrying the weight of a war that had demanded escape every single day, then punishing the men who had found ways to survive it. The jungle had offered them bottles, pills, powders, and smoke, and they had taken them because the alternative was breaking. But the jungle didn't take them back when the war ended. The habits clung, followed, settled in deep. The Freedom Bird carried men out of Vietnam, but for so many, it carried Vietnam into America too. Not just in memories, not just in scars, but in the chemical hooks sunk into their flesh. They stepped off the plane, smiling for the cameras, hugging their families, waving flags. But inside, they were still in the jungle, still chasing the haze, still fighting a war they could never leave behind. The war ended on paper. The dates are clear enough in history books. Troops pulled out, flags lowered, speeches made. The country shifted its eyes away, trying to cover the scars with parades or silence, depending on who you asked. But for the men who fought it, for the men who smoked, swallowed, drank, or shot their way through the long months of mud and fear, the war never really ended. It stayed with them. It stayed in their lungs, in their veins, in their bloodstream. Addiction is a patient enemy. It doesn't attack with rifles or grenades. It waits. It sits inside the body, inside the mind, gnawing quietly, demanding, whispering. And for thousands of soldiers, it was an enemy they carried home under their own skin. They didn't come back with enemy bullets lodged in their flesh. They came back with habits so deep that every day afterward became another battle. Back in the neighbourhoods of America, the jungle seemed far away. The air didn't buzz with insects. The nights weren't pierced with mortars. The streets weren't lined with vendors offering powder in plastic bags. But the cravings didn't fade with distance. They sharpened. Heroin wasn't $5 anymore, but men still bought it. Pills weren't handed out in bottles by field medics anymore, but doctors back home prescribed tranquilizers and painkillers easily enough. Booze wasn't hidden in canteens anymore. It was bought by the case at corner stores. The battlefield had changed, but the fight was the same. Some men tried to go cold turkey. They locked themselves in rooms, sweating through shirts, shaking until their teeth rattled, vomiting into buckets while their families stood helpless outside the door. Some made it through. Some didn't. Some came out clean, scarred but steady. Others crawled back to the needle, the bottle, the joint, whispering promises that this time they would stop. Promises that broke the next night. The war didn't leave their bloodstream. It pulsed there, day after day, disguised as need. Families felt it. Wives who had waited a year for their husbands to come home found themselves married to strangers. Hollow-eyed men who drank until they slurred, who nodded off mid-conversation, who woke in the night screaming, sweating, clawing at invisible vines. Children watched fathers stagger, hide bottles, swallow pills, drift in and out of haze. Parents who had sent off sons watched them return alive, but chained to habits they didn't understand. The welcome home banners faded. The reality stayed. Society noticed too, though it rarely said the word out loud. Veterans filled bars, crowded police blotters, packed emergency rooms. Addiction was written off as weakness, as failure, as moral collapse. Few wanted to hear that it had begun in the jungle, that it had been nurtured by a war that gave soldiers no other way to cope. The country wanted to forget Vietnam, and forgetting meant ignoring the men still fighting its chemical war inside themselves. The numbers piled up quietly. Arrests, overdoses, suicides. Entire groups of veterans who never fully rejoined the world. Some slept under bridges, clutching bottles wrapped in paper bags. Some sat in dim kitchens, staring at pill bottles like they were grenades that might go off. Some functioned, outwardly normal, jobs held, families raised, but every night retreating into haze, the jungle still whispering in the back of their minds. The war had ended, but the bloodstream kept fighting. And it wasn't just about the substances themselves. The chemicals had rewired them. Fear, pain, boredom, exhaustion. They had all been answered with a swallow, a drag, a shot. The body learned that survival meant dosing. The brain learned that relief was chemical, not natural. Back home, when the world expected them to be fathers, husbands, workers, citizens, their bodies still expected the pill, the powder, the bottle. Survival and addiction had fused. You couldn't untangle them. Some veterans tried to explain it years later. They talked about the haze, about the way the drugs softened the war, just enough to make it survivable. They talked about how they hadn't planned on bringing it home, how they thought it would stay in the jungle when they left. But the body doesn't listen to plans. It only listens to need. And so the war followed them, not in memories they could box up, but in cravings that rattled through their bones. The war that never left their bloodstream wasn't just personal. It spread. Families cracked under the strain. Neighbourhoods shifted under the weight. Children grew up in houses where the war lived in bottles on shelves, in pills hidden in cabinets, in needles tucked into drawers. The conflict wasn't over. It had just moved indoors, into bedrooms and kitchens and quiet arguments behind closed doors. Decades passed. Other wars came and went. New uniforms were issued, new enemies named. But the veterans of Vietnam carried their war in ways that no parade, no memorial wall, no folded flag could erase. The jungle was gone, but the bloodstream remembered. The habits lingered. The fight inside them never stopped. And for many, it still hasn't. The war lived long past the last helicopter left Saigon. It lived in veterans hunched at bars, in men slumped on park benches, in hospital beds where withdrawal shook bodies decades after the jungle had released them. It lived in the quiet, invisible battles fought far from the rice paddies, far from the bunkers, far from the history books. The war ended for the country. It didn't end for the men who carried it in their blood. So there it is. A war fought not only with rifles and helicopters, but with bottles, pills, powder and smoke. A war that lived in the bloodstream as much as it lived in the jungles of Vietnam. The soldiers who went there were young, 19, 20, barely old enough to vote, suddenly thrown into a world where survival meant more than dodging bullets. It meant finding a way to keep breathing when the air itself felt heavy with fear. And for so many, that way came in the form of chemicals that dulled the noise, blurred the edges, softened the corners of a war too sharp to face head on. You can almost picture it. The morning starting with cigarettes before boots even touched the dirt. Canteens clinking with something stronger than water. Joints passed around as easily as rations. Little plastic bags folded into pockets, needles hidden in socks, pills rattling in hands that were supposed to be steady on rifles. All of it woven into the rhythm of daily life. All of it tolerated, overlooked, sometimes even quietly encouraged, because the alternative was collapse. The thing about Vietnam is that it didn't stay in Vietnam. For the country, maybe it did. Headlines faded, politicians moved on. The war became something to argue about in books and speeches. But for the men who lived it, the war moved inside them. It stayed in their bloodstream, in the habits they couldn't shake, in the cravings that clawed long after they came home. Decades later, they were still fighting it, in bars, in hospitals, in quiet bedrooms where sleep never came without a pill, where mornings never started without a drink. The war was gone, but it wasn't. It never really is. Not when it takes root that deep. And listening to their stories, it's hard not to realise that what they carried home was bigger than medals, bigger than scars. It was a war that refused to end. If you're still awake, thanks for drifting through this one with me tonight. These kind of histories are dark, heavy, sometimes uncomfortable, but they show the human side of war that often gets left out of the neat timelines and the polished speeches. The side where survival doesn't look like glory. It looks like smoke curling in the dark, bottles passed hand to hand, needles pressed against skin. It looks like young men trying to make it through a day they were never prepared for. If you're listening to this to fall asleep, I hope by now your eyes are heavy, your breathing has slowed, and the sounds of helicopters and jungle have faded into background noise. If you're listening just out of curiosity, I hope it gave you a picture of the war you won't find in the usual places. Either way, I'm glad you made it this far. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into the strange corners of history. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Across countries, across time zones, across different lives. For now, let the noise fade, let the lights dim, and rest easy. You have just walked through the jungle, through the haze, through the bloodstream of a war that never really ended, and now it's time to let it all drift away. Good night.